We waited patiently for the result, and in only a moment the butler reappeared, thanked everyone for their trouble, and said the task would in the end fall to Alchemist Jin. He showed the others a flicker of apology and clapped his hands, and Joe family servants brought each alchemist a gift box. The things inside were not especially valuable, though the faces of some of the men eased considerably at the sight. A moment later I followed the butler toward another courtyard, from which came the sound of women's voices. One of the voices, a young woman's, complained that senior sister Seok had not come in a good while, and asked whether, but for the beauty pills today, she would still not have visited. The other answered that she had come because she missed her, that it had nothing to do with any beauty pills, and warned that if such things were to be said she would simply leave. The first hurried to keep her, allowing she had spoken wrongly and begging her not to go when there was still so much to tell. The butler stepped in with a fawning smile and told the young miss that Alchemist Jin had come. She glanced at me and pressed the butler on, saying she wished to eat the pill the instant it left the furnace, since she had heard that was when its effect ran strongest. I let my eyes pass once over the two women, elegant and lovely both, their figures fine even as they sat, and then lowered my head and looked no more. My nose twitched of its own accord all the same, catching a faint scent of wound medicine drifting through the room. Since taking up alchemy I had grown far keener to every kind of smell, a trick of the trade, and what reached me now was a trauma medicine of the very highest grade. A person being hurt and reaching for wound medicine had no bearing on me, so I thought little of it. The young miss, whose name I would learn was Jo Beisu, said proudly that the 50-year herb was hers, come to her by chance. Her father had meant it for other pills, she added, until she begged him long enough to let her spend it on beauty pills. Senior Sister Sok said lightly that she had taken advantage of her. Then, Jo Beisu laughed that there was no call to stand on ceremony, that so long as her senior sister visited often she would be more than glad. I closed my eyes to rest while they talked, and when the herbs were all set before me I opened them and began to refine the batch. Jo Beisu watched me with some curiosity at first, then turned her head away, bored, for the refining of pills was nothing like whatever she had pictured, and dull past bearing. I kept my gaze on the furnace, feeling the herb properties shift within it and adjusting the fire from moment to moment. Against an ordinary beauty pill, the 50-year herb surged and turned far more fiercely, and a breath of carelessness could truly have ruined the refining. Yet I knew beauty pills too well for that, and however wildly the properties turned, they stayed within my hand. The scent of medicine welled up through the courtyard, and after 3/4 of an hour I slapped the lid aside and the costly batch was properly done. Seeing me lift the pills out, Jo Beisu could not wait and dragged Sok Solgam over to stand before me. Through the lingering medicine scent, 2 wisps of a woman's faint fragrance suddenly cut in. I drew a breath without meaning to, my brows nodding. For why should it feel so familiar? The butler hurried forward to warn the young miss that the pills were fresh from the furnace, and best left a moment before she took them. She said she knew, her face all smiles over the 3 pills in the tray, since the spare one could go to her mother. Then he thanked me, bowed, and led me off, for the young miss's own courtyard was no place for an outsider to linger. Behind me, Jo Beisu asked why her senior sister was watching that alchemist. Seok said it was nothing, only that his standard ran very high, and that if ever she had need of it, she could look for him. Jo Beisu laughed that he was quite good indeed, that she had thought there would be 2 pills at most and never expected an extra. At the main gate, I took the thank you gift the butler pressed on me and bowed. He said with a smile that the whole matter was owed to Alchemist Jin, that he would send someone to the Alliance to close the task out. I gave him my thanks. He said it was rather he who should be thanking me, and after a round of the usual polished flattery I left the Jo residence, and started back. The whole way my brows stayed drawn, for I could not shake the sense that the woman was familiar, and yet I had surely never once laid eyes on that face. When Ji Dogbong saw my knotted brow, he asked whether the task had gone smoothly, and I nodded and said it was done, and he asked what had me so preoccupied. I told him I had met someone at the Jo residence who felt familiar, though I had never seen the face before, and I hid none of my puzzlement. A person met even once should not be so easily forgotten, least of all one whose fragrance had struck me so deep. He laughed and said that if even the scent felt familiar to me, then the impression must have been a deep one. I started to agree that it was deep, and then the word died in my throat as a bolt of lightning tore across my mind, for I had it at last. It was the enchantress from the mountain that night. The distance between us had been very close then, and the moment razor tense, so Seok Solgiam's scent had burned itself into me. I had failed to place it only because her face today was wholly changed. The trauma medicine had, beneath thought, knotted these things together, and set me circling the woman without knowing why, until my mind caught for a beat, and then broke through. What still gnawed at me was that on the mountain I had been certain the face I saw was Seok Solgiam's own. Had she used a disguise technique I would have caught it, of that much I was sure. Yet today her whole appearance had shifted while I could find no trace of any disguise upon it. I asked Ji Dokbong whether in this world there were ways to change a face apart from the disguise technique, since in the ways of Jiang Hu he was worlds more seasoned than I. He nodded and said there were many. When I pressed him for the ones that left no trace, his brows drew together. He knew how high my own disguise technique ran, and if even I could catch nothing, the ways that fit grew very few. He thought a moment and said there was one that answered my telling. A human skin mask. Its refining was a mystery and its use all but the deepest secret, yet worn rightly it changed a face completely. Thinking of Seok Solgyam's flawless face, I judged that only such a thing could manage it. Were it not for the trauma medicine and that thread of fragrance, I would have found no flaw at all. Small wonder the Shinyum sect could never be rooted out, its people hidden clean among the crowds, tucked even inside the old established families of Sonon City. I turned my own showing at the Zhou residence over in my mind, and judged there had been nothing amiss in it. When I faced Seok before I had worn a false face in a different build, and the chance of her seeing through me was slight, the best course was to send word to the school at once. But having only just come from the Zhou residence, rushing back myself might prove dangerous if Seok Solgyam meant harm, and so I would put off my return by a day. Even if I could not go, the message could go ahead of me, and I wrote the matter down and loosed a carrier pigeon. Then, tamping down the unease in my chest, I asked as if in passing whether the children next door had moved, since I had not heard them at play these last 2 days. Ji Daopbong looked at me, his face all confusion, and asked when there had ever been a child in the courtyard next door. A chill shot from the soles of my feet clean to the crown of my head. This was Sonun City, and yet was even this place gnawed at by ghosts, and if even here was haunted, where in the world was a man to go? I seized Ji Daopbong's hand and flashed out of the courtyard, for I could not stay, whatever the reason, since his answer had been wrong in the way of a man bewitched. He looked at my sudden move in surprise, but did not fight it, trusting that I would never do him harm. I carried him over the courtyard wall and down into the alley, where the faint noise of hawking and chatter drifted along as though nothing at all had changed. My brow stayed furrowed, for the scene around us looked in no way strange, and where I had braced to fight my way clear, I had in the end gotten out easily. Even so, staying here was far from safe, and I pulled him on toward the main street, where the press of people coming and going thinned the tightness in my chest. When he saw me do nothing further but frown, he asked what was wrong. I asked whether he knew anything of the household next door, watching the faint dark rings under his eyes, and wondering whether a ghost had put them there. He said he knew a little, and reminded me he had told me of it days ago. I lowered my voice and asked why. If the neighbors were such a large family, there were no children among them. He shook his head and said he had no idea, that it had not been his place to pry, for they were neither kin nor friends. To poke into a stranger's household was only to be taken for a man plotting something. Then something struck me as wrong. With the Changxing technique running at high speed, a thread of unreality rose in my mind. I looked at the people passing on every side, each one sharp and vivid to the eye, no flaw in any of them. And yet I had heard these very words from them before. In my memory, the movements and the talk of these same people had already happened once, back when I had stepped out of the Zhou residence a little while ago. Wrong. This place was false. I turned to Ji Dokbong, and with the Cheongsim technique driven to its limit, everything around me abruptly slowed. My eyes swept the scene, and Ji Dokbong, the people, even the surroundings themselves all showed a stuttering, unreal seam. With a loud shout, I bent my right hand into a sword finger and drove it forward, and the world before me cracked and then shattered outright. What stood there in the end was still only Ji Dokbong, my sword finger halting a foot from him. He was frightened half to death by what I had done, his body tipping back on its own as he stared at me in a daze. I looked around and found myself still in the rented courtyard, that sense of unreality already gone. From somewhere close, a child's crying reached me, muffled, but I caught it at once. In a flash of movement, I cleared the courtyard wall and dropped into the one next door, spotting on the instant a young girl clutching her head in pain. I narrowed my eyes, drew my right foot back, and appeared before her with a hand reaching for her throat. A cold palm rose into my path. No palm any living person should own, a dead thing's hand, or a ghost's. A dagger came into my grip and slashed at the sudden hand. A voice cried that it was a misunderstanding, and then a dozen more of the same palms sprang up before me, breathing a chill aura, reaching to seize my whole body. Before they had even touched me, my skin began to sting, and I drew my brows down hard, for these ghost hands were nothing to trifle with. They were edged not only with an eerie cold, but with some poison besides. A fishy sweetness I had already caught on the air. Had I pressed the attack, even loosed sword 5, I could surely have broken through the palms and hurt the girl, or killed her outright, but I would very likely have been wounded in turn, and so instead the Starry Night sword shield unfolded. The dagger struck the ghost hands, and I rode the force into a backward flip. I landed atop the courtyard wall and looked down at the girl and at an old man who had appeared beside her. Sa'uinam clutched her head, tears clinging to her chubby cheeks, no more than 10 years old. She gazed up at the old man through them and told her grandfather that her head hurt, that the bad man ought to be beaten. Sawonhei, heartsick as he plainly was, scolded her sternly, asking how many times he had told her never to use her power to sway others, that this was no game. She said unwillingly that she had only meant to play a prank, and that just now the man had been so fierce it looked as if he would come and strike her. She jabbed her small finger at me, her eyes full of accusation. Ji-Dokbong only just then clawed his way up onto the wall, blinking at me in confusion. In the blink of an eye, he had missed it all and climbed into the middle of it. What in the world had happened, I thought, my own face grim, for to be dragged into an illusion so silently, without a seam to catch, was a thing I had never looked for. Even facing Seok Solgium before, the Chongsim technique had held me clear of her lure and kept my head my own, and yet just now I had sensed nothing at all. Or not quite nothing, for the technique must have thrown some warning, or I would never have asked Ji Deokbong that question beneath my own notice. My deeper mind had found the danger first, and that was what had driven my later moves and finally broken the illusion. But the time it cost had been far too long. A battle could turn on an instant, and though in the real world I had perhaps stood stunned only a breath was room enough for another man to kill me. The old man asked with a bitter smile whether I might come down so that he could explain, swearing they meant no harm. He wore the look of a man wondering what strange business this was, having stepped away on other matters only to find his granddaughter dragging a stranger into an illusion. That I had broken free of it and all but seized the child had startled him too, for he read my realm as no more than bone forging. By that reckoning, I ought never to have pierced her illusion at all. Seonun City was truly a nest of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, he must have thought, when even a plain neighbor was buried so deep. Had I known his thoughts, I would only have rolled my eyes. A neighbor who turned out to be an expert was hardly a thing I had counted on either. I hesitated and said he could speak from where he stood, that I was listening, choosing to keep a safe distance. However harmless he seemed for now, I had no wish to stake my safety on another man's intentions, least of all one who could drag people into an illusion in a heartbeat. Sawonhei shook his head with a rueful smile, pulled Sayuinam out from behind him, and told her sternly to apologize first. To drag a stranger into an illusion for no reason, he said, was a thing for which the man would have been within his rights to kill her. He had warned her again and again, and had he come a moment later, she would already be dead. She said through falling tears that she was sorry, and I watched those tears harden into little balls of ice and drop to the ground, my eyes widening. Ji Dokbom beside me was the same, for seasoned in Jianghu as he was, this he had never seen. The old man told her not to say sorry to him, but to the one she had wronged, aching for her even so, knowing she had to carry this lesson. Sonun City was not the small town they had lived in before, where they could be a shade more brazen. Here there were experts past counting, and to provoke a man at random was only to court one's own death, and he would not see his granddaughter lose her life over a bit of play. She looked at me and bowed her apology. Anyone who did not know the truth of it would have thought me a grown man bullying a child on the strength of my power. Where does a girl of 10 bow to an adult? Seeing that she had apologized, my face eased a little, and Sawonhei said again that they truly meant no harm. Unam was born with a rare constitution, he said, and could do what ordinary people found beyond them, and she was young and heedless and forever teasing others with it, though she carried no malice. He begged me to forgive her. As he spoke, he drew something from his sleeve, and a pale ghost hand emerged to float the thing slowly toward me. Ji Dokbong's eyes near started from his head, for what manner of technique was this, that a palm should look so little like a living man's? He said it was thousand snow bamboo, and that worn on the body it could turn aside illusions to some degree, and he hoped I would take it. I looked at the thousand snow bamboo in its box, hesitated, then used my dagger to lift the box, cupped my hands to him, and returned to my own courtyard. Ji Dokbong hurried back across after me. Behind me, Sawinam tugged at the old man's sleeve and whispered that the man was so timid he had not even dared come down to talk. Sawonhai told her it was caution, that in this world only the cautious lived long. Then, his heart pinching at the loss of his thousand snow bamboo, he could not help but give her bottom a hard smack. She had not looked for her grandfather to strike her, and she burst at once into a wail louder than any before. I listened to the sounds from the courtyard next door, prodding the thousand snow bamboo with my dagger, and turned to Ji Deokbong. He said he had heard of it, but never actually seen it. Looking at the thing in its box, his brows tight, he said that if it truly was thousand snow bamboo, its powers were just as the old man had claimed. It was extremely precious, he added, a thing ordinary people seldom set eyes on. I nodded and wrapped the whole box in a piece of deerskin, deciding I would ask Master Peng Supo about it once I was back at the school. Then I told Ji Dobong all that had just happened. This did not seem to me like the Tao of martial arts, I said, and asked whether he knew what it was. Sawinam's illusion and Sa Wonho's ghost hands were both a world apart from any martial method I had ever seen. He frowned, turning over what he had read in old books, and then his eyes brightened. Once, in an ancient text, he said, a certain kind of person had been set down, folk who from birth did not cultivate the Tao of martial arts and could not learn it. Instead, they captured ghosts, sealed them into their own bodies, and fought their enemies by loosing those ghosts to do the work. I echoed the term, ghost controlling, somewhat shaken, for ghosts and men stood on opposing sides, and a mere touch spelled the ruin of one or the other. A person seizing ghosts and sealing them within himself upended what I had thought I knew. He nodded and said yes, but that the way of it carried many limits, for besides the demands it laid on a person's inborn physique, such folks seldom lived long. When I asked whether it was because of the ghosts, he nodded again, saying that sealing them within the body and loosing them in a fight taxed it heavily each time. Since these people did not cultivate the martial Tao, they were only ordinary men who could hardly bear such wear, and in the end, the ghosts would break clean out and devour their host. My brows twitched at that, for it truly sounded like a road with no way back. And yet I recalled Sawinam and Sa Wonhai. Neither of them weren't thin at all, the old man especially, ancient in the face but nowhere near collapse. Ji Delkbong thought back to what he had just seen and laughed, saying that what he knew came only from books. Either the man who wrote it had grasped the matter but shallowly, he said, or the art of ghost controlling had come a good way over the years. I nodded and did not dwell on it further. What weighed on me now was how to handle such an enemy should I ever meet one. It was well enough if the foe merely summoned ghosts to fight, for against the sort of thing Sa Wonhai had shown, I had my own answers. But to be dragged soundlessly into an illusion was a knot I could not cut. The Cheongsim technique I had leaned on until now had broken me free in the end, true, but far too slowly. Sawinam's methods had plainly been limited, which was the only reason I caught the flaw at all. Against some abler ghost controller, could I break loose so quickly? This Cheongsim technique needed raising, and I resolved to search the scripture pavilion once I reached the school, in the hope of some gain. Night fell, and the courtyard sank back into quiet. I sat cross-legged and set the Tongwan technique circling, though not as before, when I would sink wholly into the cultivation. Knowing a family of ghost controllers lodged next door kept a thread of wariness alive in me. Ji Dokbong had said before that they met ghosts on their road to Sonun City, and I found myself wondering whether such controllers' methods held good against true ghosts as well. The thoughts turned in my mind without once touching my cultivation. Then, all at once, I broke off, opened my eyes, and looked toward the door. A breath ago, an aura had flitted past outside the house, very swift and faint past all measure, the kind a man's mind will call an illusion of its own. I frowned, took the long sword up in my hand, opened the door, and looked out across the courtyard. The moon rode bright and the stars sat thin, and my courtyard lay in a remote corner of Seonun City. The street beyond had long since fallen still, so that but for a scattering of insect song the whole world seemed steeped in quiet. I walked out and looked around, and there was nothing amiss, only the late summer breeze drifting soft enough to make a man drowsy. Then I stumbled, and my whole body pitched to the ground, the sound of deep sleep rising off me. After a moment, two figures came into the courtyard and stood looking down at me where I lay as though drowned in slumber. Pil Ran glanced at me and remarked that he seemed only an ordinary alchemist, nothing out of the way. She had used a little soul-severing incense, and this small bone-forging alchemist had fallen for it at once. The incense worked its wonders even on those of the organ-refining realm, so there was no surprise in it. Seok Solgyam said nothing, her gaze fixed on the side of my face. That day at the Joe residence, she had felt a thread of familiarity about me, and had since set someone to look into it, and learned that I came from the Wanjin sword sect. Thinking of the Wanjin sword sect, she thought of the man she had met that night, likewise of the bone-forging realm, who had all but killed her. That had been the nearest Seok Solgyam ever came to death. She had marked the man for prey, only to be very nearly torn apart by that prey herself, and the memory sat too deep to fade. So many days on, the wound at her chest had yet to close, and each time she bathed and changed the dressing, she ground her teeth over it. Whether this was his true face or one thrown up by a disguise technique, she asked, turning to Pil Ran. She herself knew no such technique and had always worn a human skin mask, so she could not tell a disguise from a real face. Pil Ran was the reverse, her disguise technique superb, honed to the point of being indistinguishable from the truth, so that whether another wore a disguise was plain to her at a glance. Pil Ran took a look and said with a smile that it was his true face. Seok Solgyam called back the face of that night, wholly unlike the one before her now, with not a point of likeness in the build either. Yet she could not be sure the face she had seen then was real. Pil Ran asked whether they ought to tie me up and haul me back for questioning. Seok Solgyam shook her head and said coldly that there was no need to ask, that they should simply kill him. She was not certain I was the man from before, but I came from the Wanjin sword sect and stood at the bone forging realm. With the coincidences piled so high, she would kill me and be done. For when had she ever troubled herself over killing the wrong man? A bloodthirsty smile broke over Pilran's face, and she flashed to me and reached for my throat. For when she killed, she loved to snap a neck and hear that crisp, breaking sound. Then a clear voice rang out asking how she could go about killing people as she pleased, and Sawinam stood upon the courtyard wall, looking down and shouting. Lying there feigning sleep, I nearly spat blood from a snarl of my own internal energy. I had been set to strike the moment Pilran drew near, and had never looked for Sawinam to appear. Pilran's reaching hand paused, and she looked up at the child, a savage smile rising as she cooed that the little girl was so sweet, that big sister should have a look at her. Sawinam pouted and told her that her smile was wicked, that she was a bad person, and her eyes loosed a dazzling silver light. Pilran, on the point of rushing the child, stopped where she stood, and let her own eyes drift slowly shut. Seok Solgyeon looked at Sawinam in surprise, and then her gaze bloomed with a fierce light of its own, for a ghost-controlling physique had turned up here of all places. The school had long hunted such a physique and, for all its searching through Seonan City, had never turned up a single one, while the search the other cities was a distant hope. Now, come here on nothing but a whim, she had stumbled on, so glad a surprise. Bring that rare physique back, and the school would surely reward her past measure. Then Seok Solbyum would hold every hope of crossing the organ refining realm to stand as a power within the spirit refining realm. Spirit refining and body refining were a single word apart, and yet worlds asunder. Even as the thought crossed her mind, a silver light lit the courtyard. I, who had lain senseless on the ground, had risen at some unmarked moment and driven my sword through Pilran's brow. To her death, Pilran's eyes stayed tight shut, not the least pain on her face, sunk wholly in the illusion. Seok Solgyum's eyes narrowed at me, for she had not caught my pretense at all, and it beggared belief that a bone-forging man could bury his chi, his blood, and his strength so deep. First a rare physique, then this business with me, one surprise crowding hard upon the next. She stared at me and said I was the man from that night. The same trick of feigning, the same sinister grain, the same school, the same realm, all heaped together, made it a coincidence no longer. Ignoring her words, I turned to Sawinam and asked whether she could control the woman. Pilran's cultivation was no small thing, at the peak of the marrow refining realm, the equal of Guak Rimson's realm, and yet she had fallen to a single stroke of my sword. Even the ambush I had first planned would never have gone so smoothly, and it was only Sawinam's help that made the whole thing simple. Sawinam shook her head and said she could not control her, that the woman was too strong, and she added that she had already helped me once, that the afternoon's matter was settled. With that, she bade me goodbye and flipped back over into her own courtyard. I was left staring, for was this what a brat amounted to, that she could just walk off, having helped kill the other side's woman, with no fear of what might come back on her? A cold sneer rose on Seok Solgyum's face, and her figure flickered and stood before me, the curved blade sweeping around toward my neck. The starry night sword shield shattered under the blow, and a huge force flung my whole body into the courtyard wall and lodged it there. She said it really was me, and at the sight of the starry night sword shield, the hatred in her eyes burst its banks. Just as she made to rush in and finish me, a pair of pale palms rose out of nowhere and clamped about her ankles. A layer of ice crawled up from Seok Solgyum's pale ankle, and within moments had climbed to her knees. She was furious, and just as she made to blast the spectral claws away with her chi and blood, her vision blurred and she saw the sect master walking toward her. Embedded in the wall, I watched the change come over her, above all the way her eyes were slowly beginning to close. Sawinam's voice came thin with alarm, crying for her grandfather to hurry, that the woman was struggling too hard. A pair of spectral claws closed about Seok Solgyum's neck and began to tighten, while another, gripping a keen blade, flashed in from afar straight for her head. I forced a little strength through my body, pulled myself out of the wall, drew my right foot back, and appeared before Seok Solgyum with my longsword leveled. The Chongsim technique flared to its full extent, and for a moment the whole world held still. All the force in me surged up from my toes and out along my arm as I drove the sword forward with everything I had. Sword 6 was not yet mine to give, so I gave sword 5. A hard clash of steel rang out as my long sword met the scimitar, which began to twist and break away inch by inch from the tip. Then Seok Solgyum kicked me in the chest, and I spat a mouthful of blood and flew backward, smashing hard into the courtyard wall, which shattered and dropped me into the yard beyond. I dared not linger. I flipped myself upright, spat another mouthful of blood, and my face went pale. Had I not used the sword principles of the Starry Night Sword Shield to turn aside the force of that kick, it would have been no simple matter of spitting blood. My sternum would surely have caved and my organs been crushed by the brute force of her realm. Set against the bone-forging realm, the advantages of the organ-refining realm were simply too vast. not a thing a man could master merely by wishing to cross realms. Seok Solgium drew the scimitar back from her face, her look gone cold. The spectral claws at her neck and ankles had already been shattered and the ice driven off. She knew that had she not slipped free of the illusion in time, she would already be dead. Twice now she had come to this pass, once through her own carelessness, and once because she had never looked for me to have a helper, and a helper of such enormous strength at that. Only the treasure she carried had let her wake in time. For any other practitioner of the organ-refining realm, walking into so tight a joint attack would already have gone cold. Sa Wanhei held his granddaughter's slack body, his eyes full of dread. He had miscalculated, for he had meant only to do me a small favor, judging the character I had shown worth an investment, and to make a peace offering besides for Sa Winam's recklessness that afternoon. He had never looked for the enemy to be so troublesome, nor for Sa Winam to be knocked senseless by the shock of it. Seok Solgium told him coldly to stay quietly aside, and she might spare his life, and warned him not to blame her for ruthlessness otherwise. Then she turned her gaze back to me and started forward a step at a time. If I dared to run, she would strike at once. Back on the mountain she had been ambushed by me and so could not give chase, but now that her wounds had mostly closed, she was certain that however extraordinary my footwork ran, she could kill me here in this courtyard. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and I wanted to flee, for there was no shame in running from such an opponent. Only her whole aura pressed down on me, and a single rash move would have brought a storm of blows. Yet if I did not move, her step by step would crush all the space around me until I died regardless. So the only choice left was whether to die sooner or later. The Chelmseam technique wheeled madly through me, forcing my racing heart still. I turned over one escape after another and threw each of them out, for the gap between us was too plain to bridge with any trick. Then Sa Wonhei's voice came at my ear, telling me that in a moment he would pin her with an imprisonment technique, and asking whether I could still loose that sword strike from before. I said nothing, only slid the hilt in my hand into my left sleeve, and when I drew it out again, a new long sword had appeared in my grip. Seok Solgium was stunned for a beat, unable to catch the least clue of what sword-hiding trick this was. With a shout, Sa Wonhei formed his seals, and a dense mass of palms welled up behind him, 100 at a rough glance, and an icy aura filled the whole courtyard on the instant. The next moment, those spectral hands vanished and reappeared all around Seok Solgium, and a force of utmost cold and utmost yin swept across her whole body. Frost bloomed on her brow until in a breath she was frozen solid. Sa Wonhei's face aged all at once, and he collapsed straight to the ground, for it was an ultimate technique that fed on his own lifespan, kept for the very edge of life and death. He had never once imagined that a single act of kindness could turn into so many twists. Seonun City might be far safer than other places, but let danger truly find a man there, and it was magnified beyond all measure. There was no time now for regret. From the moment Sa Winam attacked, and from the look in Seok Solgium's eyes when they fell on the child, Sa Wonhei had known he had few real choices left. Either the woman died or his family went on living as fugitives. I drew a deep breath, and my body became a streak of light as I appeared before Seok Solgium, thrusting the longsword forward inch by inch. The sword's aura flickered along the blade. Veins bulged at my temples, and the flesh of my right arm shook without pause. My skin could not hold the violent straining of the muscle beneath, and cracks began to tear open across it. Blood seeped from every pore, and in the space of a breath I looked a bloody ruin, a sight to freeze the heart. Sword 6. Pushed past the limits my body could bear just then, it was an ultimate strike, and against the desperate cast of Sword 5 it was a blow I delivered with my own life. Sensing the danger, the ice sheathing Seok Solgium trembled, and a faint light bloomed from her head. As though it had met a blazing sun, the ice thawed away by more than half in an instant. Her eyes turned on me, with pupils gone pitch black at some unmarked moment, and my Chungseam technique spun to its very limit to hold off her lure. But the whole foundation of Sword 6 was the Chungseam technique's utter command of the body, and now that command was being clawed at from without. Had it been only Sword 5, I could have carried it through, but the extreme nature of Sword 6 set the move shaking in the same breath. Gritting my teeth, I felt the sword slip past my control, the power massing on the blade ringing sounds of strain from the steel. The ice on Seok Solgium kept melting, and that faint light flared up before me, until in my sight I lost her altogether. I cursed inwardly, for when I met her days past, she had not been half so troublesome. Had she been like this then, I would never have had the chance to wound her so badly, and I now suspected she carried a treasure. Leaning on the Chungseam technique's memory of the ground around me, I drove the longsword forward. A great blast tore the air, my vision cleared, and I found the longsword shattered once more, only the hilt left in my hand. Seok Solgium's right arm, shoulder blade and all, had vanished, and she leaned against the corner of the wall now, drenched in blood, glaring at the three of us with hatred. Her arm had been blown clean off, and even reattached later her strength would be gutted. The door to the spirit refining realm perhaps closed to her forever, past all hope of a breakthrough. Just as I meant to step in and finish her, I spat blood and my whole body swayed, for the burden of Sword 6 had been simply too great, near enough to drain me dry. The Shangsing techniques fouling at the last had only heaped harm on harm. Seok Solgeum rose unsteadily, a faint light turning at the sight of her wound, and for all the terrible gash it had already stopped bleeding. She said she would remember every one of us, that this was not over, then beckoned with her left hand, and her severed arm flew back to her. Catching it, she cast a look of hatred at us and made ready to flee. Then a voice called from beyond the courtyard asking where his junior brother had gotten to, and my face turned interesting on the spot, for it was Guak Rimson. I shouted back that I was here, having never dreamed he would find his own way to this place, since the letter I loosed by pigeon in the daylight had carried no address at all. Seok Solgeum's face, already pale, filled with despair at the sound, for it was the dead of night, and still the enemy had a helper coming. She dared not delay, and with the faint light whirling frantically, she bolted for the courtyard gate. Having no power left to give chase, I could only shout for Guak Rimsan to stop her. He was bewildered, but seeing someone rush out, he stepped up to bar the way. When he found himself facing a one-armed beauty, he was struck dumb, wondering what in the world was going on. I called out that she was the demoness of the Shinyom sect, that he should take care. His whole expression turned grave at once, his eyes fixed on the faint light off her body, which pressed on him as a vast threat. She told him icily to let her go, not to force her to drag him down with her, and he shouted back that only a fool would ever let her go. His body swelled a fraction, and in a single step he stood before her, his broadsword sweeping level to crash against the scimitar she raised to block. The next moment, Seok Solgeum smashed through the wall and dropped into the yard, already senseless. Guak Rimson blinked, for he had braced for a bitter mutual destruction fight and never looked for it to fall out so simply. Seeing the end of it, a wave of relief broke over me, and I could not help but crumple to the ground, for we had kept her here at last. Seok Solgeum had the ill luck to run into Guak Rimson. He had not even shrunk from holding a white candle to lure ghosts, so how would he flinch before a woman hurt as badly as she? He first shattered her dantian with a single palm, turning her into an ordinary person, and then bound her fast. While he tied her, he caught a jade pendant flickering faintly at her breast, and he plucked it off at once. Then he set about pinning her down with every kind of internal energy he knew, whether it would help or not. After a good while of bustling, Guak Rimson came over to me, put the jade pendant in my hand, and asked, somewhat lost, what all of this was about. I asked him, just as lost, whether Master had not sent him to find me. He shook his head and said no. That Master had been away from the school 2 days. He had only come, he said, because he had broken through to the organ refining realm and wanted to share the joy with me. He scratched his head, admitting he had caught my Sonun City address once and forgotten it in a blink, keeping only the rough quarter. He had circled the place several times and called out along the way before at last finding it. I looked at Guak Rimson caught between laughter and exasperation, for he had come only to crow over his own good news. And yet by that very chance, he had saved me. Given the enmity sealed between Seok Solgeum and me today, had she not been kept here, it would have meant an endless entanglement to come. My strength was far below hers, and even with Sawane's help, both sides had come away gravely hurt. So had I faced her alone afterward, I would hardly have had such luck. Under any ordinary meeting, her footwork outran mine, and had I tried to run, I could not have escaped. I would have been chained to the Wanjin sword sect for good, unless I one day broke through the organ refining realm myself. I sat on the ground and told Guak Rimson, with a smile, that he had saved my life today. He laughed and said there was no need for such talk. From the day I had gone with him to lure ghosts, the two of us had shared a bond forged over life and death. It was for that very reason that he had come running to share his breakthrough the moment it landed, and by a twist of fate had helped me deal with Seok Solgeum instead. Truly it was destiny, he said. After we had set the wrecked courtyard to some order, Sa Wonhei's people helped their own back to rest, and I returned to my courtyard and roused the still senseless Jidopong. Guak Rimsan kept watch over Seok Solgeum, and crippled though her cultivation was, he dared not slacken, above all for fear she might take her own life and rob us of the prize. I swallowed healing medicine and spent the whole night circulating my cultivation technique to knit my wounds. The Tonwon technique was worthy of a Wonjin sword sect intersect art, for it not only fed cultivation, but worked wonders on wounds. My body, so lately at the edge of collapse, steadied after a single night, and in another 2 or 3 days I would be whole again with no ill after effects. Night thinned and the sun climbed. While we were still weighing whether to send Seok Solgeum to the school or wait for someone to come, a knock sounded at the door. Guak Rimson went to open it and called out in surprise, for it was Master Peng Supo, who had been away from the school the day before when Guak set out. Master Peng Supo nodded and stepped into the courtyard, and I rose in haste and bowed to him. He nodded, glanced over the wreck of the yard and my still badly injured self, and frowned, saying it seemed he, their master, had come a step too late. Guak Rimsan closed the gate behind him and said, unable to hide his excitement, that they had caught the demoness. Master Peng Supo was somewhat surprised, for I plainly had no fight left in me, and must have taken even graver hurt in the night. And merely to have lived through it was luck. From the message I had sent, the woman stood at the organ refining realm, and however heaven-defying my bone-forging cultivation ran, I ought to have turned and fled at the mere sight of her. With a sigh, I said the neighbors had fortunately lent a hand, and gave a brief account of it. Hearing of Sa Wanhai's methods, Master Peng Supo looked surprised, for such ghost controllers were rare indeed to meet in daily life. He told me in a heavy voice to take him to see the one from the Shinyum sect. Coming back to the school that morning, he had seen my message and hurried straight over. And fortunately, nothing past mending had come of it. In a room, we found Seok Solgeum bound and cast on the floor. Awake now and hearing the sound, she made no move at all, only staring blankly into the distance. Her cultivation crippled, and herself trussed up here. Her fate was sealed, and she had lost interest in everything beyond. She wanted even to die, only she was pinned by Guak Rimsan's internal energy and could not manage even that, for his chaotic handiwork had, against all odds, done its job. When I asked Master how we should deal with the demoness, he thought a moment and said in a heavy voice that he would take her straight to the Sonon Sword Sect. The Shinyum sect was powerful, for it had stood against the Sonon Sword Sect all these years without being wiped out, and its stubbornness ran past all imagining. The Wanjin Sword Sect had no need to shoulder such a matter, since should the Shinyum sect turn its gaze our way, we would likely suffer heavy losses. Just now, with so many people flooding into Sonon City, the Wanjin Sword Sect had found room to grow, and we wanted no such trouble knocking at the door at such a time. He warned us to keep the matter secret and speak of it to no outsider, or we would only bring trouble down on ourselves. We nodded, for before a behemoth like the Shinyum sect, a man dodged aside wherever he could. He told us to take care of ourselves, then seized Seok Solgeum from the floor and vanished in a flash. Master meant to dump the whole trouble on the Sonon Sword Sect and win some benefit in return. And on that, the Sonon Sword Sect was never stingy. My strength was still too thin, for a bone-forging man meeting an organ-refining one was bound for peril. In a world already fallen into chaos, Master had resolved to fetch me some good things from the Sonon Sword Sect. After Master left, we talked it over and consulted Sa Wanhai, and settled on moving out of our present quarters. The night's uproar had been no small thing, and a careful search might yet turn up a thread. Later, through Sa Winam's questioning of Seok Solgum inside a midnight illusion, we learned she had come on a mere whim and had reported it to no one above. That let everyone breathe easier, though for safety's sake we moved all the same. We had Ji Dokbong change his face, find a broker and rent 2 courtyards near the heart of Sonon City, and sow the dearer for it. I still had some assets though, and to thank Sa Wanhai for the night I paid for all of it. When Sa Wanhai said they should cover their own rent, I told him that but for him I would have lost my head the night before. What was so small a sum against that? I took out the 1,000 snow bamboo and pressed it back on him, saying he should keep it, and he waved a smiling hand and said there was no taking back a gift once given. We pushed it back and forth a while, and in the end I accepted, since to keep being courteous grew unseemly. A good deal of my saved silver had gone again, but I had already made up my mind that once I returned to the school in a few days, I would redeem the formula for the Buryong pill. I had once meant to rebuild that formula on my own, out of the stubborn, prideful hunger of a man to achieve it himself. But there were far too many calls on my money now, so I would follow my heart and start selling Buryong pills. The Buryong pills would never move in the numbers the Jangbu pill did. It was not because there were few buyers or the price ran high, but because I could not gather the herbs for them the way I could now. The herbs for a Jangbu pill came through many channels, all of them ordinary year stock, while the Buryong pill set a floor on the age of its ingredients. Much as with the Meridian pill and its aged mains, the Buryong pill wanted main herbs of at least 10 years, and even the lesser herbs carried limits of their own. It was those age restrictions that drove the price so high, and later it would test Ji Dokbong's knack for turning up herbs, or else I would have to find a way through the alliance. Whatever came of that, redeeming the formula carried only gain, at most costing me the small pride of having derived it myself. I had spent 5 days recovering in Sonon City, and they passed calm and untroubled. My wounds healed, and I had not set down the 3rd level of the Tongwan technique through them, though the drag of the injuries had left the proficiency a touch short. I had meant to finish the 3rd level before returning, but word came from Master Peng Supo that he had settled the matter of Seok Solgeum and was calling us both back. We did not delay, and once through the mountain gate we went straight to his courtyard. When Guak Rimsan announced us and Master called us in, we found him seated at a stone table, turning a yellow bead over in his fingers. He told me to take it, and with a gentle push of his palm, the bead came sliding before me, so that I caught it without thinking and looked at him in confusion. It was the Nawan bead, he said, sipping his tea with a smile. For luck had been good this time, and he had come by it from the Sionon sword sect. It should be of great help to my cultivation. Guak Rimsan put in, pleasantly surprised that it was good stuff. I could not help studying the bead in my hand, plain and unremarkable, for all the world like a lump of mud pinched together by some idle child. It helped absorb the origin chi of heaven and earth, Master said, setting down his tea with a smile. A martial artist in the body-refining realm drew his internal force from food and medicinal pills. Yet origin chi truly existed in the world, and one in the spirit-refining realm could open his own acupuncture points to draw it in. I looked at the bead and asked whether it stood in for the acupoints of a human body. The function was much the same, he said, shaking his head, though its effect was less than a tenth of theirs, perhaps lower still. Even so, he went on, the Nawan bead was a fine thing, for at the least it let a body-refining martial artist sense the presence of origin chi ahead of time. That would help when he came to cultivate the spirit-refining realm later. It was true, Guak Rimson added from the side, that within our school few below the rank of true disciple held such an item. When I asked whether he had won, he smiled and drew a Nawan bead of his own from his robes, saying Master had given it to him. But for him Siok Solgium would surely have escaped, so he deserved a share of the credit. The Nawan bead helped a man drink in origin chi, a treasure for a body-refining martial artist bent on hastening his cultivation. Master Pung Supo had once stood in the spirit-refining realm and later fallen in rank through injury. So for him, the bead no longer held any use. He shook his head and said he had pestered a Sionon sword sect deacon a good while before he could trade for one. Set beside a dominant power like the Sionon sword sect, the Wanjin sword sect stood truly several tiers below. I asked, curious whether the thing was hard to refine, since so few in the school owned one and he had won this after capturing an organ-refining martial artist of the Shinyum sect. He said it was reckoned rare both within the school and out in the wider world. Yet at the Sionon sword sect, the same Nawan bead was standard issue for their finest intersect disciples. Standard issue, I said, my eyes widening, and asked whether the Nawan bead was not then a spiritual artifact. In my mind, no ordinary object could help a man draw an origin chi, only the fabled spiritual artifacts. Yet no house, however rich, could hand every disciple one of those, or the gulf between the schools would have been too wide to credit. It was not a spiritual artifact, he said with a smile, only a thing that held some portion of a spiritual artifact's power. The Nawan bead was the pit left behind once the fruit of a spirit tree in the Sonon sword sect had been eaten. For them then, it was a thing produced every year, nothing to marvel at. A fruit pit, I thought, feeling I had swallowed a great deal in one sitting. If the pit alone carried such virtue, what then was the flesh, and what might it do to a man who ate it? Guak Rimsan read the look on my face, laughed, and clapped my shoulder, telling me to stop chasing the thought. Common as the bead was among the Sonon sword sect's inner disciples, the fruit itself was not for just anyone to eat. When I asked whether the pit might be planted, Master shook his head and said many had thought the same and many had tried, all to no effect. Plenty envied that spirit tree, he said, for a part of the Sonon sword sect's strength rested in it. But the tree demanded extreme conditions of its ground that we could never provide. And besides, the pit had already been refined, its life force long since cut off. I nodded in understanding and rubbed the Nawan bead, feeling the grain across its surface, which did indeed carry a woody touch. Worn on the person, the bead had a certain effect, he added, but to wring its fullest power from it, one did best to learn the general art for this spiritual artifact. He drew a secret manual from his sleeve and handed it to me, its name, Spirit Artifact Mastery. Then I remembered the jade pendant I had taken from the demoness, and asked Master whether it too wanted some special art to drive it. Guak Rimsan and I had studied it several days and found nothing. Whether by internal force or any other means, the pendant had flared once that night and then gone dim, as though it were only common jade. I had meant to give it to Guak Rimson, but he would not take it, so it remained with me still. Master glanced at it and said, with some regret, that it was a half-made spiritual artifact, likely the leavings of a failed refining. A true spiritual artifact could be fully driven only by one in the spirit-refining realm, he said. And below that, a man who wished to drive it generally paid with his own lifespan. Seizing the rare chance, I brought out another box, the Thousand Snow bamboo that Sawane had given me, and asked what Master made of it. It had some power to turn aside attacks on the mind, he said after a look, and I could wear it on my person as a rule. Should I ever come to refine a spiritual artifact, it would serve as an auxiliary material, a decent spiritual stuff. I nodded, for against the jade pendant and the Nawan bead its use ran thin, and yet its worth down the road could still be looked for. If the other organ-refining martial artists ever saw the net worth I carried, Guak Rimson said with a wink, they would surely harbor wicked designs. Master nodded and agreed that Rimsan was right, and warned me plainly not to flash such things before outsiders, lest I call down needless trouble. This disciple understood, I said with a smile, being no fool, for these were clearly not things an ordinary body-refining martial artist should own, and I would keep them buried deep. Why go parading them about, unless I was weary of living? Master told me to be careful whenever I went out these days. Then he turned to Guak Rimson and said that, having broken through to the organ refining realm, he should settle himself over the coming months, and then challenge the true disciple legacy. Guak Rimson answered low that he understood, for the true disciple legacy touched the very ceiling of his future road, and there could be no carelessness in it. Then Master turned to me and asked how my cultivation technique was coming along, whether I had been slacking. It had been set back a little by my injuries, I said, but by my reckoning I should carry the third level of the Tongwan technique to perfection by the next day. Master's hand paused over the teacup, and he set it down without haste, a faint satisfied look crossing his face. He said my cultivation was going well, and told me to come find him the moment the technique reached perfection. I cupped my hands and thanked him, a smile on my face. Guak Rimson stood off to the side with his mouth agape, all but choking on his own breath at word of my progress. He had the strangest sense of time bent out of true, for he clearly remembered that Master had taught me the third level only 10 days past. That meant I had grounded to perfection in about 10 days, hardly different from the time the second level had taken me. What monster's pace was this? He must have wondered, for he recalled that the third level had cost him a very, very long while. Was it possible he thought that the school's Tongwan technique had been quietly swapped for some new version, and that this was why everyone's speed diverged so wildly? A quarter of an hour later, Guak Rimson and I left Master's courtyard. Watching us go, the face Master had held so taut at last let a smile through, for it had been no easy thing to keep it in. The comprehension ability I had shown already outstripped that of an average true disciple, and though true disciples cultivated ordinary techniques quickly enough, what truly set them apart was their speed with the high-level arts. The higher the level climbed, the more it laid bare the distances between men, distances that hardly showed at the low rungs at all. Should I keep such comprehension ability with the higher techniques to come, Master judged, my future achievements would be well worth the waiting. As for my thin potential, there might yet be a way to mend it later. Only my cultivation was still far too low, and all of this had to be kept close, for a genius not yet grown was no genius but only a falling star. I said my farewells to Guak Rimson and set off toward the scripture pavilion. Beyond learning the Tongwan technique, the scripture pavilion was the great reason I had come back. It was not only for the Biryan kill formula, but because I wanted a cultivation technique to shore up my defense of the mind. The Chongsim technique was fine and had carried me through more than one crisis, yet its guard was already straining to keep pace with the force of the enemies I met. Sawinam's illusion was proof enough, and she was a girl of barely 10. Her power owed to her physique, the two of us friends now rather than foes. Still, I had to lay some groundwork, for stronger attacks on the mind might well wait for me down the road, and to shore myself up there could do no harm. If only the scripture pavilion held such a technique for me to learn. Walking the mountain paths, I traded cupped hand greetings with the disciples I passed and asked my way as I went. After the time it takes an incense stick to burn, I saw a pavilion set upon a hillside. The ground before the pavilion lay quiet, and yet 100 yards off the crowd was thick and loud. One hawker cried that a man would not lose out and would not be cheated, that the 1,000-origin hand deserved to be his. Another saying that whatever a man said, if he could not win he had best run fast, and that with the 1,000-mile soul chaser his enemies would scream behind him forever. As the rising and falling calls of the hawkers reached me, I was left rather stunned. I walked over to one of the stalls and found it heaped with cultivation technique secret manuals of every kind. The sight dragged up a sudden memory of Ji Jokbong hawking his own manuals back in Pyongyang County. The stall owner, all warmth, asked what I would like. When I pointed at the pavilion in the distance and asked whether that was the scripture pavilion, he laughed at the confusion on my face and said it was. These manuals of his had come from the outside, he explained, and differed from the ones within, and here a man could pay in silver or trade in kind. I nodded, then asked, still curious, whether the school allowed stalls to be set up like this. He scratched his head, young as he looked, and said he did not know how it had been before, only that it was already so when he arrived. He asked whether I had been to the treasure pavilions, since there were stalls outside that place as well, selling weapons and sundry goods. Much the same as here. It came clear to me then that the school had never set up a proper market, and simply let the disciples put out stalls before the two pavilions as they pleased. He pressed me to look over his manuals, saying that though they fell short of the ones inside, they had the merit of being cheap, easy to learn, and easy to grasp. They were, at the least, a means of self-defense. I asked, half in idle trial, whether he had anything that strengthened one's guard against divine thought attacks, and he said he did and dug one out for me to see. I took it, leafed through it briefly, and then closed it to think. It was only half a manual, and yet a man could still make something of it. Its effect running rather like the Chungsim technique I already studied. Ground to great perfection. It could to a degree see through illusions, and leave one less easily lured by strange entities. Had I met this manual before ever coming to Sionan City, I would have bought it without a second thought. Though it overlapped my Chungsim technique, after a fusion it would still have strengthened the whole somewhat. But now, standing at the Wanjin sword sect, such a manual felt like a chicken rib, worth keeping only if nothing better waited inside. When I asked the price, the owner smiled and named 501, and I nodded and handed the manual back. He hurried to say I need not rush off, that if I found it dear I could make an offer and we would talk the price down. The corner of my mouth twitched, for the routine was all too familiar, and had I actually made an offer, he would surely have taken it on the spot. I said nothing, waved him off, and walked into the scripture pavilion without bothering with the other stalls. The moment I crossed the threshold, the noise outside vanished, and though there were still a fair many people within, all of them kept silent, the place gone utterly still. It put me much in mind of the libraries of my last life, rows of shelves in neat order. What stood on them was not the manuals themselves, but detailed accounts of the cultivation techniques and secret manuals. To obtain an actual manual, a man went to the counter by the entrance, where a deacon disciple registered it and handed him the real thing. The scripture pavilion was parted into 4 quarters: movement techniques, sword techniques, internal energy, and miscellaneous arts. Few lingered in the internal energy quarter, for the Tongwan technique was mighty and served as a bridge to the sect's other arts, so scarcely any disciple would turn aside to cultivate something else. The greater press gathered in the sword and movement quarters. Each inner disciple's master could teach only the specific arts the school permitted, not everything he knew. A disciple who found a technique ill-suited had to come here for another, which was how the weight of contribution points was kept. Some came merely to widen their eyes, with no thought of trading for anything at all. I passed the other quarters by and came to the miscellaneous arts, thick with manuals of every sort. There were the weapon arts outside of swordsmanship, and pill formulas, and artifact refining, and even music and chess and calligraphy and painting. A thoroughly mixed and crowded lot. I went first to the pill formulas, took down the one for the Biryong pill, and glanced at its price. 2,000 contribution points. My eyes brightened, for it was far cheaper than I had reckoned, the one catch being that nothing learned here could be spread without leave, and the price of discovery ran steep. After reading the Biryong pill's account, near enough to what I already knew, I sent it back and hunted out the formula for the Meridian pill. 1,000 contribution points. The price was fair enough, but as I had already reasoned, my time was pressing just now. A pill with so narrow a market and such hard-won ingredients did not suit me at the moment, so I put it back. Then I set to searching for the Divine Thought manuals, and the shelves being so vast, I had to ask a passing disciple before I found a shelf tucked into a corner. I stepped up for a look and could not keep a flush of gladness from my face, for better than half the shelf stood filled with manuals bound to Divine Thought. I had feared before that even one would be hard to find, but plainly I had underrated the depth of the Wanjin sword sect. It was a thing owed to my own narrow view, coming as I did from so small a place, where the curbs on manuals ran far too tight. I began with the first at the top right and meant to read every Divine Thought manual there before settling on the one I needed. An hour slipped past, and I stood at last holding the accounts of the 2 that remained, caught in indecision, for I liked them both, and had points enough for only one. The first was the Heart Origin Technique, also called the Heart Monkey Technique, meant for taming a man's own divine thought and stray thoughts, which leap and jump like monkeys and will not settle. Cultivated to success, it held the man forever calm and let him seize each of his own thoughts clean and clear. Much like the Chongsim technique, only stronger. Brought to great perfection, the Heart Origin Technique can turn the power of divine thought and thought back upon itself to strengthen the divine thought, a groundwork for the spirit refining realm. The spirit refining realm asked a divine thought strong enough to measure the acupoints and open them, for if it fell short, a man could not so much as measure them, let alone open them. 5,500 contribution points. I did not find the price dear, but rather judged it worth more than its cost. A divine thought strengthened now would make cultivating the spirit refining realm later twice the gain for half the toil. The one drawback was that the technique took a slow, steady, gradual road. Even at great perfection, it could not in a stroke lift my resistance to divine thought attacks, but leaned on time, much as internal energy leaned on it to grow. The second was the heart-locking technique, which by a special method compressed a man's own divine thought. Though the total stayed unchanged, its density rose sharply, and its guard against divine thought attacks rose along with it. Cultivated to its later reaches, the heart-locking technique so raised the purity of the divine thought that controlling it grew easy in the hand. Its one flaw was that the compression itself was fearsomely hard. Internal energy was already hard enough to compress, let alone the slippery, hard-to-hold divine thought, so that its overall difficulty matched the heart origin technique while its entry barrier climbed far higher. The heart origin technique could not be called easy to learn and hard to master, but at least its doorway was the gentler of the two. The heart-locking technique asked 5,000 contribution points. Had it been possible, I would have traded for both, so that my divine thought might grow in total while its purity was not neglected. That would have made it all the handier when the day came to measure the acupoints. But my pockets were empty, and reality did not stretch to both, so I had to take one first. The Cheongsim technique could already see through illusions to a degree, and were I to swell the whole of my divine thought, I might well amplify what the Cheongsim technique could do. Bigger was always better, fatter the caliber, truer the aim, and a man never went wrong betting on more. After a moment's hesitation, I chose the heart origin technique all the same, resolving first to make my divine thought big and strong, which served the future better. The heart-locking technique's compression could wait for a day when I had more points to spend. Mind made up, I came to the scripture pavilion counter and said I wished to trade for the Biryong pill formula and the heart origin technique, handing over my waste token. The deacon disciple glanced at me, for the two together came to 7,500 contribution points, a sum most disciples of the organ refining realm found hard to muster. He had not looked for this bone-forging disciple before him to hold so many. He asked nothing and offered no reminder, only deducting the recorded points from the token and having someone lead me to a room. On the table lay the two secret manuals, the Biryong pill formula and the heart origin technique, and my task now was to copy them out by my own hand and carry them off. Were it ever found that I had leaked manuals of such a grade, my cultivation might be crippled, and I myself cast from the school. Most men destroyed the manuals. Then, once their cultivation of them was done, an hour later I left the scripture pavilion and returned to my room. My panel told me it had detected a pill formula and asked whether I would spend 1,001 to simplify the Biryong pill formula. It simplified, and the Biryong pill formula turned into the Jangbu pill formula, which was no surprise at all. I turned then to the heart origin technique and spent half an hour running it through once, which went smoothly enough on the strength of my Cheongsim technique foundation. My panel showed the heart origin technique at entry, 1 out of 2,000. Then I willed the panel to fuse the Cheongsim technique and the heart origin technique. It answered that it had detected a cultivation technique and asked whether I would spend 5,001 to simplify the Gyeongwon art. It simplified, and the Gyeongwon art folded back into my Cheongsim technique. The panel now reading the Gyeongwon art at proficiency, 2,356 out of 5,000. The cost of simplifying had climbed sharply, and after the fusion the proficiency had shifted enormously, so that even the proficiency alone now wanted 5,000 to reach the top. Fortunately, the simplification left the cultivating no harder for me, only a matter of how much time it would take. The business of cultivation techniques was not yet done. I brought out the spirit artifact mastery I'd gotten that day and spent half an hour reading it through. Then I tried to run it once, only to find it so obscure that I failed on the instant. I was in no hurry and calmed my mind and gave it a full hour and more, until at last I managed to run it once within my head. My panel showed the spirit artifact mastery at entry, 1 out of 3,000. This mind-bound cultivation technique was truly the harder sort, its demands on proficiency of a different order, and I gave the command to simplify it. The panel simplified the spirit artifact mastery, and it turned into draw visualization diagrams. A smile rose on my face, for the spirit artifact mastery had been about copying visualization diagrams within one's own mind, and now, simplified, it came down to drawing them. As for hand speed, when had I ever been afraid of that? Still, I could not grind the proficiency of the spirit artifact mastery just yet, for the third level of the Tomwon technique sat only a hair short of perfection. I had to finish the Tomwon technique first, all the more since I was to learn its fourth level the next day. I opened my mouth and swallowed a Jangbu pill, and in a moment its cooling energy spread through me, my internal force surging along the meridians on the Tongwon technique's path. My muscles and bones trembled, and my muscles drew taut, and the state held for a full 2 hours before it slowly eased. I opened my eyes and felt the surging power within me, for the third level of the Tongwon technique had reached perfection. I rose and stood in the room, and a longbow appeared at once in my hands, and as the force within me stirred, a power far beyond the usual welled up. Giant strength. With my left hand on the bow and my right on the string, the longbow that had always taken real effort to draw full now came full with ease. I drew it to its limit, and loosed again and again, and after dozens of times I felt no fatigue at all, the surging power in me showing no sign of ebbing. By the records of the cultivation technique, the awakened giant strength would hold for a quarter of an hour once roused. So long as I did not overspend the force, my power would not flag through it. This bow was a touch weak, I thought, and I could ready a stronger one in the space grid later. A smile came to my face. for the coming of giant strength meant a plain and solid lift to my fighting power. Yet it was far from the end, for the Tongwan technique still held a 4th level and a 5th, and the 5th would awaken iron bones, another mighty trait. There were the 2.5 spiritual artifacts besides, and once I ground the spirit artifact mastery to its top, I would be able to drive all 2.5 of them. Turning this over, I put the bow away and crossed to the desk. Brushes and ink and paper and inkstone were always kept there, for besides the disciples, the Wanjin sword sect had many ordinary folk and low-ranking martial artists in its service. I ground the ink a while and then something struck me as wrong, for why must I use ink at all, when plain water would surely do? So I took up the brush, dipped it in the clear water at hand, and began to draw a pattern on the paper. As a martial artist, and a swordsman at that, my hands were very steady, and I drew the pattern the spirit artifact mastery asked for in a single stroke. My panel gave me 1 point of the spirit artifact mastery, and I smiled, for the method held, and there was nothing more to say of the road ahead but to grind it. I did not close my eyes the whole night, drawing without pause, using up several basins of clear water. When the sun rose I stopped, and stretching my muscles and bones cracked, for sitting up through the night was somewhat more of a chore than cultivating an internal force art. But for me, as I now was, holding on a few days was no great matter, and at most I would find a time to catch up on sleep and mend the body. As my realm rose in the days to come, my endurance would only grow, and even unbroken late nights, I reckoned, would trouble me little. My panel showed the spirit artifact mastery risen to proficient, 5,879 out of 10,000. It was still early and Ji-Dokbong had not yet come, so I put the brush and paper away, took the Neiwan bead from my breast, and set it before my eyes. Carrying it all the day before, I had felt little of the so-called origin chi, at most a faint near imperceptible coolness where I kept it. As for what that thread of origin chi did for my body, I had not felt it at all. Yet on the panel my internal force's growth had indeed ticked up a little. Not by much, but over the years it should still count for something. I fixed my eyes on the bead, and let my mind swiftly visualize the totem within it, and the next moment the whole Nawan bead changed utterly before me. Its earthy yellow was gone, and in its place a vast ring of light rose up and framed me within it. Glancing around, I found the room's furnishings vanished. Only a misty expanse lay before me, hemming everything in so that I could not see far. I looked down at myself and found I had not changed. Was this within my own mind, I wondered, or something I had merely imagined? I set the question aside at once, for even in that short moment I had felt a weariness settle over my mind. I had stayed up the whole night without feeling much, and yet in that brief spell my mind had taken a toll. With a low shout I willed it to withdraw, and the pattern in my mind flashed. The ring of light circling me trembled, drawing the surrounding mist inward in wisps that were pulled into the ring. As the mist, or rather the origin chi, entered my body, the Tongwan technique began to turn of its own accord and swallow it down. A floating ease rose in me, for the drinking in of origin chi drew a kind of pleasure from my very body. Cultivating internal force, comfortable enough, had never given more than a sense of being filled. Never this near addictive delight. My tiring mind eased a little as well, for though it went on being spent, the rate of it slowed. Where before I might have held out only a quarter of an hour, now with the origin chi drawn in, the time should stretch some way further. In a feeling that seemed as though it might run on to the end of time, the moments flew, until a tearing sensation from my mind dragged me back into the world. My face had gone somewhat pale, and though my body felt no discomfort, my mind stung plainly from too great a spending. They said the mountains kept no sun and no moon, and a man of truly deep cultivation could likely fast on the drawing in of origin chi alone. My stomach, faintly hungry in the early morning, now felt full, surely the work of that origin chi. I looked without thinking at the panel, at the account of the bone forging realm, and my eyes widened. In that short spell, less than a quarter of an hour, my internal force cultivation had leapt by 300 points. What kind of thing was this? On an ordinary day, 7 Jiangbu pills, together with the growth the Tongwan technique brought, gave me 200 points across a whole day. Yet less than a quarter of an hour of drinking origin chi had caught and passed everything a full day had given me before. By my first reckoning, from the bone forging realm to the marrow refining realm, as the Tongwan technique perfected itself, I had been sure of breaking through within a year. If the 4th and 5th levels weighed heavily on the realm, it would be sooner, though 7 or 8 months would likely have been needed even so. But now a single Neiwan bead had cut that span in half, so that I might break through to the marrow refining realm in 3 or 4 months, or, no, a little earlier than that. The spirit artifact mastery stood only at proficient. Once I ground it to great perfection, the mind spent in driving the Nawan bead would surely lessen, which meant the time I could use it would stretch. More than that, I now held the Gyeongwon art, an art made precisely to strengthen the mind, and as I cultivated it, the span I could drive the Nawan bead would go on lengthening. The one trouble now was that the Neiwan beads seemed rather fragile. I looked at it in my hand. Its earthy yellow turned shriveled, as though it had lost its moisture. Plainly there was a limit to its use, and now I had to wait for it to recover on its own. Thinking of Master Pung Supo's words, that it held less than a tenth the effect of the acupoints, I sighed with some regret. Had I only more Nawan beads to use in turn, and mind enough to spare, my cultivation could have burst into flood. But I had only the one, and no one would ever lend me another, since everyone had need of his own. After a full half-hour's rest, the ache in my head at last eased a little, and I wasted no time but set again to drawing the patterns. Knowing now what the Nawan bead could do, I had no cause for idleness. I would spend every scrap of time to bring the spirit artifact mastery first to great perfection, and then drive the Nawan bead to its limit day by day. 3 or 4 months to the marrow refining realm was nothing to grumble at. I was drawing on, when a knock at the door pulled me back, and one look at the sky beyond the window told me Ji Dokbong had come. I opened the door, looked at Ji Dokbong standing there, and my brow drew together. He held the packet of medicine and looked back at me in some confusion, asking what was wrong. I asked why his color had grown worse, and whether he had gone to the Chui Hong Pavilion again. Living together those past days, busy mending my wounds and seeing him every day, I had felt nothing amiss. But now, a single day apart, I marked at once that something in his state was wrong. However hard a man threw himself at the Chui Hong Pavilion, with the foundation of a bone-forging realm martial artist beneath him, he should never have thinned to this. The aura Ji Dokbong carried now, by my sense of it, was likely not even the equal of a Yonyu realm martial artist. Far too weak. He said that coming here today he too felt short of breath, that he had even stopped to rest along the way. He too found it strange, for he had noticed nothing before, yet reminded by me he saw that something was wrong. And as for the Chui Hong Pavilion, he had not set foot in it for several days. I asked Ji Dokbong whether he has any other discomfort, and he thinks about it before answering that, apart from his physical strength being a little worse, everything is fine. His spirits are actually better than before, he says, and the only strange thing is how often he wants to go to the Chui Hong Pavilion. I frown at that. Listening to the symptoms alone, it sounds like nothing more than the wages of too much indulgence. Except his physical state cannot be explained by indulgence. So I ask whether he always sees the same woman when he goes there. He nods, and thinking of those curves, he grins at me. I ask him to consider whether there is any chance he has been used as a cauldron. I have seen records of it somewhere, though I cannot place them at the moment, and his behavior lines up too well to ignore. Then again, a man used as a cauldron usually shows far more dramatic effects, ruined after one session or two, and Ji Dokbong can still run and jump and is still thinking about matters below the waist. It does not fit cleanly. The word cauldron changes his face. He protests that the Chui Hong Pavilion is a running business and would never dare do such a thing. I point out that he did not die inside it, so what exactly would they not dare? Even going there now to make a scene, I tell him quietly, will get him nowhere, because the most anyone will conclude is that he is simply not capable. His face darkens. No man wants to be called incapable, and making a scene on those grounds would only earn him laughter and nothing else. If it truly is the Chui Hong Pavilion, I add, they probably decided he had nobody standing behind him, which is why they treated him this way. Ji Dokbong carries a fair amount of money, and a business like that will not spare a fat sheep worth shearing, on top of which, his symptoms do not prove the pavilion did anything. He decides simply not to go again, because a scene has no meaning and he cannot win. To keep a shop open inside Shonan City, the Chui Hong Pavilion's backing must be enormous, and Ji Dokbong sits at Bone Forging Realm, while plenty of the pavilion's guards stand above him. Storm in there and he gets thrown out, or quietly taken. No version of it ends well. I look at the dark rings that have settled fully under his eyes, and tell him that he has stayed away for days, and his color is still getting worse, so this is not something abstinence will solve. Then I suggest we go and ask senior brother Guok whether he knows a method. Inside the Wanjin sword sect, Guok Rimsan is the only person I can turn to. My own business with Pung Supo is easy enough, but where Ji Dokbong is concerned there is a layer of distance. We go to Guok Rimsan's residence, and he is surprised to see the two of us. He knows Ji Dokbong well enough, since they were all living in Sonun City together only days ago. Inside, he pours 2 cups of tea and asks what is wrong. I point at Ji Dokbong and say he may have been used as a cauldron, then lay out the situation briefly. Ji Dokbong laughs awkwardly through it, because the whole thing is hard to say out loud and sounds worse than it is, and being used as a cauldron by a woman of the Chui Hong Pavilion is frankly embarrassing. Guok Rimsan's eyebrows lift when I finish. He senses internal strength through Ji Dokbong's body and genuinely finds the signs of vitality being drained. Left on this trajectory, he judges, Ji Dokbong will look like an old man within a few months. Ji Dokbong reads his face and asks nervously whether it can be cured. Living somewhere as prosperous as Seonan City, working for me now, never having chased the martial road hard, he has been living very comfortably. Being told that comfort is over is not something he is ready for. Guak Rim-san thinks a moment and says it is difficult, and that forcing a solution will almost certainly drop his cultivation straight back to muscle refining realm. He is no physician, but this is not an illness. It is a secret technique planted in a man. Removed improperly, Ji Tokbong will not die, and the loss will be severe. Ji Tokbong's face changes. He never had high hopes for the martial road, and he still does not want to lose a whole realm, because that means damage to essence and energy and spirit. He does not like remembering what he suffered to reach Bone Forging Realm in the first place. I ask whether we have to find the people from the Chui Hong Pavilion, and Guak Rim-san nods, saying it is best to find that woman and negotiate, and let her lift it herself, since that leaves no complications. I turn to Ji Tokbong, and he meets my eyes and sighs that her name is Baek Sung-wei. A passing romance, he says, and he never expected it to end like this. Guak Rim-san smiles and tells us to go, that he will come along and that he hopes money can settle the matter. He counts as an organ refining realm martial artist and an intersect disciple of the Wanjin sword sect, so his standing carries a little weight, and he hopes it counts for something. I bow with folded hands and thank senior brother. Ji Tokbong starts to bow too and gets stopped, with Guak Rim-san waving it off and saying the matter is not finished and there is no need for ceremony between us. On the road, Guak Rim-san suddenly remembers to ask whether I have finished the third layer of the Tongwan technique to perfection. I tell him I finished last night and awakened the great strength characteristic. He nods with a little envy in his eyes, which anyone would feel knowing that comprehension, and the part that stings is that I am also diligent. He has been cultivating harder lately purely because I keep provoking him into it. He shares what he knows, that a characteristic like great strength is best triggered once a day, because the more it gets used, the longer it holds. I ask whether that is true of all characteristics, thinking of the strange state the tranquility source art produces. More or less, he says, since usage lets the body remember the state, and he has heard of people in the sect who hold great strength and ironbone permanently without either fading. My eyebrows lift, because apparently that is possible. I turn over the feeling of triggering great strength yesterday against the feeling of the tranquility source art, and the two share something when they are running. That is worth sitting down with properly, or worth asking Peng Supo, who should know, having once been a genuine power in the spirit refining realm. The three of us run at full speed and arrive beneath the Chui Hong Pavilion. By day, the place is quiet compared to the lamps and traffic of its nights. Most of its customers still asleep in the land of tenderness. It stays open regardless, though daylight means tea and music rather than clinking glasses and dancing. We sit, tea comes, and Guak Rim-san turns to the maid and says, "We would like to see a young lady, because this kind of business is best taken straight to the person." She asks who the guest wishes to see. Ji Tokbong pushes 5 ounces of silver across and asks for Baek Sung-wei. The maid says she is here, takes the silver without seeming to, bows slightly, and goes. The woman she brings back is middle-aged and still striking. She looks a touch old and her figure and face remain first-rate. I glance at Ji Tokbong. His taste is not bad. Baek Sung-hui's eyes light at the sight of him and she says he has come at last, and that she has missed him terribly. She settles beside him as naturally as breathing, tucks herself into his arms, picks a grape off the table, peels it, and feeds it to him. He opens his mouth on reflex, and only after swallowing does he remember what he came for, and his face sinks. Reading that, she smiles and asks whether the grape was not sweet, and offers to pour him sweet tea instead. Then she takes a mouthful of tea and, without the slightest concern for who is watching, leans in and passes it to him mouth to mouth. I sit there watching, genuinely impressed. Never mind Ji Tokbong. Any man alive would struggle against this. What makes it work is that every movement and posture and word and expression of hers is too natural and too intimate, as though the whole of her world contains only him. Who is supposed to withstand that? He swallows hard, turns his head away from her, and says with a straight face that he has something to ask her. She twists against him without cooperating at all, boneless and coaxing, the sort of thing that makes a man want to gather her up and treat her gently. She looks at him with real affection and wants him to drink the sweet tea, and there is something like hunger in her eyes. He tells her he is talking about serious business. A wave of wanting rushes up into his skull, and he shuts his eyes, opens them again, and forces it down. Ji Tokbong is no lecher, and he now knows his body is wrong, and however appetizing she looks, he holds on by willpower alone. That surge a moment ago was absolutely not normal. She asks then what business he wants to discuss. Seeing that he means it, she swallows the tea, though it seems she drinks it too fast, and a thread of it runs from the corner of her mouth in a way that is anything but accidental. He looks straight at her and asks whether she has used him as a cauldron. She covers her mouth and laughs prettily, letting her eyes sweep over him, and tells him the joke is not funny at all, that she is only an ordinary woman, and how could she possibly use him as a cauldron? Guak Rim-san speaks up, saying that since Brother G started coming here, there has been a problem with his body. He sets the other matters aside and asks Miss Bake to undo the secret technique, and says that as long as she is willing, everything is open to negotiation. She sits up straight, smiles at him, and says that many things should not be said carelessly, and that she does not understand what he means. If this is what we came for, she says she is afraid she cannot help. Ji Dokbong says heavily that he has come to see her many times, spent a great deal of silver, and never been stingy, and that even if there is nothing between them beyond a transaction, she cannot harm him like this. Coming to the Chui Hong Pavilion was buying happiness with money. He was happy. And then this. Wakrim-san tells her to undo it, and we will treat the whole thing as though it never happened. Chasing the matter is pointless. Solving it is the righteous road. The pavilion's backing is real, and the losses so far are small enough that peace is best. She asks whether he is threatening her, and then laughs suddenly and claps lightly, and several figures appear behind her at once. She tells us that if we came for happiness, she will serve wholeheartedly, and that if we came to make trouble, then she must be forgiven for calling on others. Guak Rimson looks at them. Everyone is Marrow Refining Realm, which is nothing in his eyes, except that if a fight actually starts, it will not stay at a handful of Marrow Refining martial artists. I frown and tell her we came to negotiate and that she is welcome to state conditions. A place like this wants money and nothing else, so enough money should end it. Ji Dokbong has nothing else worth coveting, being an ordinary bone-forging realm man in middle age whose martial road has little future left in it. So, what is there besides his silver? She laughs behind her hand, glances at me, and turns back to him, asking what conditions she could possibly have, and saying she only hopes he will come and see her every day. Her hand strokes his face while she says it, and she tells him he must still like her, and that if he feels uncomfortable anywhere, she can share the burden. Red threads crawl into his eyes as she speaks, and his body starts to tremble, as though instinct is trying to throw him at her. The more he struggles, the more delighted her smile becomes, and the wider her smile grows, the harder he shakes. Guak Rimsen snaps that this is going too far, and a burst of energy drives into Ji Dokbong and stills him instantly. Ji Dokbong sags against the chair back, breathing hard. A moment ago he thought he was gone, a hair's width from raw physical instinct tearing through everything he had. She observes that we evidently do not require her company, gives us a small curtsy and leaves. The guards throw us a cold look and vanish too. Guak Rimsan sighs that she plans to live off him for the rest of his life. Nothing said in that room slipped past her. She came prepared, left no leverage anywhere, and gauged Ji Dokbong's backing precisely, which puts force completely out of the question. She intends to squeeze him dry and certainly will not let him die, because a dead man pays nothing. Put politely, he is a long-term meal ticket. Put honestly, it is robbery in daylight. His face is pale. He says he would rather lose the cultivation than be worked like a puppet. And since peace is impossible, he simply will not solve it. Ji Dokbong considers himself an old hand in the martial world, a seasoned hunter, and never expected to be blinded by a bird. All he can say is that somewhere as comfortable as Sonun City made him drop his guard, and he walked into this quietly. My brow stays knotted. A man goes out to spend a little money on pleasure and comes home trapped. Why is there danger in absolutely everything? Guak Rimsan says quietly that if Ji Dokbong could raise his cultivation to Marrow Refining Realm, the technique would hold no fear for him at all. That realm changes the tendons and washes the marrow, and Baek Songhui's own cultivation is not high enough for the seed to survive it. Ji Dokbong laughs bitterly. He is middle-aged. He reached bone-forging realm on a stroke of luck, and his body is already in decline, so another step up the martial road is easier said than done. I ask whether the technique must be undone by her personally. Normally, yes, Guak Rimsan says after thinking, though a power in the spirit refining realm willing to help could dispel it easily using refined spirit. Refining apertures means using spiritual power to measure and open them, and spiritual power that pure can find something as elusive as an aperture. So unpicking a planted technique would be trivial for it. Except that anyone with a connection at Spirit Refining Realm would not be negotiating with Baek Songhui at all. One word from that height and even the Chui Hong Pavilion would show respect, and none of this would be necessary. The Wonjin sword sect certainly has such elders, and none of them will spend themselves on an outsider. If Peng Supo's realm had not fallen, he could do it. His cultivation has regressed to Organ Refining Realm, and his spiritual power has withered with it, leaving only a trace of what he had, so lifting this would cost him enormously. Then I ask whether there are specific details involved. It occurs to me that my cultivation caps both the quantity and the quality of my spiritual power. Between the Tranquility Source art and the general explanation of spiritual artifacts, I am unusually flexible in steering it. That second one exists precisely to train spiritual power for driving semi-spiritual artifacts. At the proficient level, my control is already far better than it was. Pushed to great perfection, perhaps I could manage this. Guak Rimzan looks at me doubtfully, apparently wondering whether I mean to try it myself. I say nothing and steer the two of them out of the pavilion. Back in the rented courtyard, I take out the Nawan bead. Guak Rimsan glances at it, and his eyes widen slowly, because he knows that shriveled look intimately, the sign of a bead nearly spent, and one that will drink origin chi back on its own over a day. That is not the part that gets him. The part that gets him is that I only received the general explanation of spiritual artifacts manual yesterday, mastered the basics that night, and have already used a Na1 bead down to that state. What kind of learning speed is that? What kind of comprehension? He has been steadily overestimating me, and I keep handing him fresh shocks anyway. No true disciple ought to comprehend like this. He thinks, and if Wanjin sword sect disciples were this exaggerated, the sect would have overtaken the Sonin sword sect long ago. Then he asks me, in a mysterious voice, whether strange thoughts ever surface in my head, or whether I dream of being someone very powerful. I look at him sideways and ask what he means, because dreaming of being powerful is a strange question, and I do frequently dream of my previous life. He says he suspects I am the reincarnation of some mighty expert, and then laughs at his own idea. He means nothing by it. My talent simply startled him into saying something absurd. My mouth twitches. What kind of theory is that? Then he looks at me and says that the Sonon sword sect refusing me is truly, and does not finish the sentence, caught between pity and a strange relief. The Sionon sword sect's conditions are undeniably better, with things like the near-standard Nawan bead and 100 other advantages the Wanjin sword sect cannot match. With the comprehension he has watched in me, starting there would have had me shining inside a year. The Wanjin sword sect starts far lower and gives far less. And since I did enter the Wanjin sword sect, he is delighted, because it means a top-tier expert may rise here someday and carry the whole sect forward. Better still, only he and Peng Supo know what my comprehension looks like, and as long as they keep it quiet, I can grow while I am still weak, without dying early for it. I bring him back to business and ask how a man uses spiritual power to undo the technique. He does not know the exact method either, he says, gesturing vaguely, and describes the general process as sensing the technique with one's spiritual power and then undoing it. Ji Dokbong looks at him. Words were spoken and nothing at all was said. I look at him with precisely the same expression, faintly embarrassed under the two of us. Guak Rimson laughs and says he will try first, since his spiritual power has been decent lately. He sits Ji Dokbong down properly and puts a hand on his wrist. Ji Dokbong feels a foreign surge run through him and settle at his abdomen, searching for something. Sweat beads on Guak Rimson's forehead. In less time than an incense stick takes to burn, he opens his eyes, his face gone pale, and says tiredly that he found it, roughly in this position. But his energy is too coarse and all he can do is force it, and his spiritual power is not refined enough either, so he can only vaguely make out the nodes, and cannot undo them. My brow twitches, and out of curiosity I step forward and put my own hand on Ji Dokbong's wrist. Following the techniques of the general explanation of spiritual artifacts, I move my spiritual power along with my internal strength into his body. I find it quickly, a seed-shaped mass of internal strength sitting in his abdomen. That seed does not belong to him, and it is now wound deep into the surrounding flesh, and into his own internal strength besides. Under the sight my spiritual power gives me, the thing is exquisitely made, and no amount of internal strength alone will sever what connects it to him. Cut by force, his internal strength and his body both take enormous damage. By Guak Rimson's estimate, he drops a full realm and ends with a body worse than an ordinary man at muscle refining realm. Left alone, the seed keeps drinking blood and internal strength to grow itself, which is a slow execution. And from what happened at the pavilion, the seed answers entirely to Baek Hui. If she wants him dead, she only has to make it burst, and he ends up dead or crippled. Impressive, I say a moment later, opening my eyes and rubbing my temples. The structure alone says the technique behind it is not low grade. What I cannot tell is whether this is her personal work, or whether every woman in the Chuihan Pavilion knows the move and picks her targets. Guak Rimson asks how it went. I shake my head and admit I cannot undo it either, and Ji Dokbong's face darkens beside me, because being controlled by someone is terrible, and being controlled by a courtesan is worse. The worst of it is that she made her intention perfectly clear. She means to wring every drop of value out of him. He forces a smile and says we should just tear it off, since it is only one realm and he never had ambitions for the martial road anyway. No need to rush, I tell him, waving it off, and say I will try again in a few days. Then I suggest he go next door and ask Senior Saw, because those methods might manage it. His eyes light up. Given how consistently mysterious the guiding ghost lineage is, there may genuinely be a way. He says goodbye to us both and hurries out. He does not go next door immediately. He goes to the street first and buys gifts, especially snacks children like, and only then pays the visit. Half an hour later he comes back with the gloom gone off his face. Guak Rimson looks at him, surprised, and asks whether it is really undone, wondering whether a ghost guider's handling of spiritual power is that fine. Not undone, Ji Gelpong says, smiling. Old Master Sa used a secret technique and sealed it. I ask how long that holds, since a seal inside a living body is hard to maintain indefinitely. 3 months, he says, after which he can go back, though the next sealing will only hold 2. It will get harder every time, Hua Grimson says, nodding, because a seal treats the symptom and never the root. Old Master Saw also told him that if it comes to it, he can remove the seed outright. His cultivation would still fall, but it should stabilize at the early bone forging realm rather than dropping to muscle refining. Ji Diopong grins at that, because he can accept it. Good, I say. He is safe in the short term, and I will spend the next several days working on my spiritual power and see whether another road opens. The matter is mostly settled. Only mostly because the woman who did it is still perfectly comfortable inside the Chui Hong Pavilion. Swallowing a loss in silence with no way to answer it is a terrible feeling. She operates inside Sionun City and moves with guards. Snatching her off a street is difficult and would look appalling, and the pavilion would answer with everything it has. Letting someone touch one of their girls inside Sonon City without responding would cost them the respect of the entire city. If only as a deterrent, they would come out in force. So the rational reading is that this is a lesson to be swallowed. I grind my teeth thinking about that seed. I have an idea, and I cannot use it yet, because I need finer control of my spiritual power first. Ji Dokbong stays in Sonun City. Guak Rimset and I go back to the Wonjin sword sect. I call at Peng Supo's courtyard with my hands cupped, requesting an audience, and he tells me to come in. He is out in the courtyard, and seeing me he smiles and asks whether I have finished the 3rd level of the Tongwan technique. I have reached perfection, I tell him, and trigger the great strength characteristic so that my frame swells slightly and the muscle goes hard and defined. He laughs out loud at the sight. I told him I could hit perfection on the 3rd level today, and he was not entirely sure what to expect, for no reason except that it is too fast enough to feel unreal. He waves me over and says he will explain the 4th level, and I sit down on the stone chair fast. He spends nearly 2 hours going through the 4th level twice, worried I might miss something. Then he tells me patiently to ask now if I have questions. I have none, and I stand and bow and thank my master for the teaching. The panel logs the 4th level of the Tongwan technique at 1 out of 12,000. The proficiency requirement has doubled off the 3rd level, which for me, with the meridian pills I hold now, means roughly 10 days to perfection. After that, I get to see what the 4th level does for internal strength cultivation. He waves me back down onto the seat and tells me that cultivating the martial road is rowing upstream, and a man who does not advance falls back, and I must remember it. He is mostly afraid a young man might grow complacent. I tell him I understand. Then I remember what Senior Brother Guac said and ask about characteristics, since the one's techniques grant all run on a timer, and I have heard some people ignore the limit and hold theirs permanently. That would turn an active skill into a passive one. No activation, every strike carrying it. An enormous gain. The body tempering realm cannot do it, he says, shaking his head, and at most a man extends the duration. Doing what I described requires the spirit refining realm, because that realm lets a man use spiritual power to fix a characteristic permanently into the apertures. My eyes brighten, because it really is possible, and since it turns on apertures, it is far too early for me. Once a man is proficient in the general explanation of spiritual artifacts, he continues. He can use his spiritual power a little, so if danger ever demands that a characteristic's duration be stretched, folding spiritual power into it is worth considering. Then he looks at me seriously and says never to use that method unless there is no choice. It injures the mind easily, and an injured mind makes breaking through to the spirit refining realm brutally difficult later. As he says it, he teaches me the trick of it, which is not hard, and I have it immediately. He did not want to mention the method at all, but people run into danger, sometimes fatal danger, and worrying about the future in that moment would be pedantry. At a moment like that, a desperate move beats sitting still and waiting to die. A quarter of an hour later, I leave his courtyard for my own room. First, I refine every herb Jidopbonk sent this morning into Jangbu pills, pushing up my Biryong pill proficiency along the way. Then I start swallowing meridian pills and cultivating the Tongwan technique like a madman. 3 hours in, during a break, I start drawing the patterns for the general explanation of spiritual artifacts and do not stop. Except for eating and relieving myself, I do not rest, working from evening straight through to the next morning and only easing off when Jidokbong knocks. His color is far better and the dark rings have gone back to normal. I hand over some pills and herbs, take a walk around the sect to loosen up, and go back to it. 3 full days and nights of that without stopping, and the general explanation of spiritual artifacts formally reaches great perfection. Holding the Nawan bead, the visualization diagram in my mind flickers, and the bead turns into a halo that wraps around me. With a thought, the origin chi outside the halo floods inward and pours into my body. The halo shatters instantly and the room goes back to normal. I have no attention to spare for any of that. I am running the Tongwan technique as hard as I can, refining the origin chi in me piece by piece into my own internal strength. A cup of tea later, I open my eyes, look at the panel, and start smiling. My internal strength value has gone up by more than 500. The price is most of my spiritual power, and a Nawan bead that now resembles deadwood. I use the great perfection of the general explanation of spiritual artifacts at full power to force the bead's maximum capacity open in a single instant. And then, on something like a siphon effect, drew an extra portion of origin chi through it. The bead is not damaged. I absorbed more with less mental cost. And the growth in my internal strength is the proof. There is a ceiling on this kind of origin chi infusion though. I have felt it lately, and the reason is probably that my own foundation is still thin, since I am only bone forging realm, and my body is not strong enough yet. The next morning, Ji Dokbong arrives on schedule. I ask him, smiling, whether he wants revenge. He asks revenge for what? Baek Songwi, I say. He blinks, then shakes his head and says to forget it, that we cannot afford to provoke the Chuihong Pavilion, and that this is not worth dragging me into. He has self-awareness about a colossus like that, and he means to let it rest. I did not say he should beat her to death in the street, I tell him, laughing, because that kind of revenge is the most direct and carries the heaviest consequences. Kidnapping her is not realistic either, he says, apparently assuming I plan to use a disguise and take her. Even that causes too much commotion and invites other outcomes. Not that either, I say, somewhere between laughing and giving up. Why does his mind go to those angles first? If I meant to do it that way, I would not have waited days. He asks how I intend to take revenge. Then, and I pull the jade pendant from my robes, the semi-spiritual artifact I took from Seo Solgom. He recognizes it and asks how we use it, since he watched Squawk Rimson and me study it without apparently working anything out. By reversing the seed inside him, I say, before that we go back to Sonun City and have Old Master Sa lift the seal, because only then can I modify it. He frowns slightly at reverse and unseal and does not refuse, because unsealing and resealing shortens the duration, and he has decided to trust me. Enough time together will do that. Half an hour later, the two of us are in Sawonhai's courtyard. Sawinam is reading aloud, and her gaze keeps drifting toward us, her dark eyes moving, some scheme or other going on behind them. Sawonhai says quietly that undoing the seal is not hard, and that afterward there may be pain, because the seed will instantly start eating essence blood and internal strength. Ji Daopbong startles and nods anyway. That seed specializes in eating exactly those things, and after days sealed with nothing to drink, it will suck for everything it is worth the moment it is freed. I stand to one side rubbing the jade pendant. My original plan was to wait for great perfection and then try unpicking the seed with spiritual power directly. The odds would not have been high, though several attempts might have found a sliver of a chance. And at minimum, it would have trained my control. As it turns out, while exploring the pendant these past days, I found something extraordinary in it. This semi-spiritual artifact can distort reality to a degree, according to a person's intent. It makes wishes come true. When I first realized that I was shaken that such a thing exists, then I dug further and found that the degree is small and the scope is narrow. A man cannot wish for a soybean and have one appear. It is not that kind of modification. Put a raw soybean in front of the pendant, activate it wishing the bean cooked, and the raw soybean becomes a cooked one. That sounds useless, since cooking a soybean is trivial. Applied to a person in a small enough range, it becomes something else entirely. The first thing I tried was amplifying the growth of my internal strength. Whether the scope was too broad or the pendant simply lacks the power, the command went unexecuted and burned my spiritual power for nothing. Then I tried to obtain origin chi and got no response at all. After testing more things than I can count, I finally understood how the thing actually operates. The command cannot have a wide scope, because past a certain width the pendant lacks the strength for it. When Seok Solgyam used the same pendant, she only ever ordered it to melt ice, to stop bleeding, and to blind me. Simple commands, all of them, so all of them completed. Eventually, I settled on strengthening the resilience of certain meridians while the Tongwan technique was running. The moment my spiritual power ran dry, those meridians reverted. That taught me the last rule. The change is temporary, and when the spiritual power is spent, everything returns to what it should be. While I am turning all that over, Sa Wonhei has already struck Ji Dokbong's abdomen with his palm. Ji Dokbong's features twist instantly, as though insects are biting hard at his flesh, and his internal strength, and within moments he is soaked in cold sweat. Fortunately, it does not last long and slowly fades. His face is pale and he looks like a man whose blood and chi have been drained. He walks shakily to a chair, sits and breathes deeply several times before recovering. For a moment there he thought his stomach had been punched through. He wipes his forehead and turns to me and says to begin. I nod, step in front of him, let the visualization map of the general explanation of spiritual artifacts run through my mind, and the pendant in my hand gives off a faint light. I take his wrist and send that light into him. Under the sight of spiritual power, I find the seed at once. It has grown since I last looked, and with essence blood and internal strength moving inside it, I can actually make out more of its structure. With a technique like this, if Baek Song-wi lay with him again, she could drink everything the seed has gathered and turn it into her own cultivation. I do not delay and let the light wrap the seed. If I wanted, I now have some confidence I could pull the seed out of him entirely, which would be letting her off far too lightly. Reverse. I give the pendant the command, and the light shivers, and under it the seed's structure shifts in some way I do not understand. That is the strength of the thing. A man gives a general conceptual order without needing to know how the change is achieved, and if the pendant can do it, it happens. If it cannot, a man may burn every drop of spiritual power he owns, and it still will not. Fortunately, as far as the pendant is concerned, the seed inside Ji-Dokbong can be modified. Shortly, the light stops shivering, which means the modification is finished. My spiritual power keeps draining, because holding the modification is what costs, and the moment it runs out, the seed reverts to its original form. I spend 80% of my spiritual power driving the light and leave it sitting inside him. Then I open my eyes, smile at him and tell him we are going to find Baek Song-wi. He looks at me confused and asks what we are going to find her for. I raise an eyebrow and say we have come for the things the two of them usually do. A childish voice asks what things they usually do. Sawinam has put her book down and is looking at us with open curiosity. Adult business, Ji-Dokbong says, his old face going red, and tells her children should stay out of it. She informs us she does not care to hear about it, and that we are simply too loud and have been disturbing her reading. Then she curls her lip, glares at him, and stamps into the house to make her displeasure architectural. Go quickly, I tell him, because the pendant's power only holds for half an hour. Half an hour is a bit short, he says, standing, and noticing the difference already, the discomfort in him receding fast, on track to put him back where he was before the seal. Just go, I say, caught between laughing and swearing at him. Even now he is showing off. He bares his yellow teeth at me and flickers away toward the Chweihong pavilion. I sit with Sa Wonhei a while, then go back to my own courtyard to wait. Ji-Dokbong crosses Seonun City like wind and reaches the pavilion in less time than a cup of tea takes to drink. The maid takes one look at how impatient he is and covers her mouth, because a guest this eager is rare even here. He asks straight out whether Baek Seongwei is in, still catching his breath, and the maid smiles and says Sister Baek is here, and invites him to take tea while she fetches her. No need to fetch her, he says, put 5 ounces of silver in the maid's hand, and tells her to take him straight there. Her smile widens and she leads him to the door. She begins to announce a guest, and he cuts across her, says his own name, and shoves the door open. Baek Sing-wi is stretched out lazily on the bed. Seeing him, a triumphant smile spreads over her face, because after all of it he has come back after all. She waves the maid out, and the maid withdraws obediently and shuts the door. She asks whether he wants wine, and offers to serve him well, and starts to rise. He is on her before she finishes, pinning her flat to the bed. The maid does not leave, waiting nearby in case anything is wanted. Nothing is wanted. What she hears instead, shortly, is a great deal of noise, and a woman asking him not to be in such a hurry, and to go slower, and saying that clothing is being torn, and that he is hurting her, and finally asking for mercy. Half an hour later, Ji-Dokbong walks out full of energy, looking years younger, his aura pushing at the peak of bone-forging realm. The maid looks curiously into the room. Baek Sung-wi is spread across the bed like soft mud, her face gaunt as though a year or two has been taken out of her, wearing a satisfied smile. I sit in the courtyard turning over how to use the pendant better. Strengthening parts of my meridians makes my Tongwan technique proficiency climb faster, though what I actually want is to pull in origin chi directly, since that is the most practical gain of all. Imagining a Nawan bead into existence as past the pendant's power, I decide, rubbing my chin. What I wonder is whether I can use it to buff a real bead and push its output a little. Then Ji-Dokbong comes back so pleased with himself that his face looks ready to lift off. I ask how it went, and he laughs and says subduing one woman is hardly difficult and that he already made her lift the technique. If she had refused, he says, she would not have been getting out of bed for days. He is not exaggerating. If he had not been worried about killing her and drawing the pavilion's attention, he would have been rougher. He has not only cleared the danger out of his body, he has siphoned back a great deal of essence besides, and now has a real hope of stepping up into marrow refining realm. I can see the change in his aura myself. From being on the edge of dropping a realm to standing on the edge of a breakthrough is the difference between the ground and the sky. Looking at it, even I feel a little envious, though that kind of essence is impure, so the method is not one I could use. Ji-Dokbong could not care less about purity, and reaching marrow refining realm out of it would be an outright win. I tell him quietly that he should probably stay away from the Chweihong pavilion from now on, and let the matter end here. Teaching Baek Song-wi a lesson and letting him keep the essence she worked so hard to steal counts as the account being settled. He nods and says he knows, and that he is satisfied with this outcome, because the result already runs well past what he expected. At noon I share wine with him and then start back to the Wonjin sword sect. With this problem solved, I need my daily routine again, and with everything finally moving in a good direction, I have no excuse to slack. On the road back, cresting a hill, a rumbling blast reaches me, and I look up to find two men fighting. Judging by the scene, both are marrow refining realm, one distinctly stronger and currently ahead, though winning outright will take him a while. I take one look, decide not to meddle, and plan a detour. I have seen lethal fights on this road several times, and every time I hear a commotion I steer clear so that nothing invites itself onto me. Then Shim Jongyeon spots me, his eyes light up and he shouts for me not to leave, promising a handsome reward if I help him bring this man down. The other man's face changes, and he shouts back that Shim Jongyeon is killing for treasure and will kill me too once he has what he wants. Nonsense, Shim Jongyeon snaps, his eyes narrowing with a cold glint, and promises to tear the man's tongue out first once he has him. I tell them to settle their own business, say I have no intention of getting involved, apologize, and run for the distance. I do not believe a word about a reward, and even if it were true, I would not stay. Then he shouts that I am a disciple of the Wanjin sword sect, going by my direction and my clothes, announces that he is a disciple of the Sonun sword sect, and says this man has insulted his sect, and he hopes I will lend a hand. The other man curses that this is absolute garbage. I pause for a fraction of a second and neither stop nor answer, and I am gone into the forest a blink later. Fighting erupts again behind me and I frown slightly. I did not expect to run into a Sonun sword sect disciple, and none of it is mine, and involving myself only buys trouble. Back at the sect, I finish refining a batch of Jangbu pills and then cultivate the Tongwan technique as usual. 3 hours on, with my spiritual power recovered to nearly half, I start testing whether the jade pendant and the Nawan bead will work together. 5 days go by. In my room, I run the general explanation of spiritual artifacts, while driving both the bead and the pendant at once. The pendant's faint light feeds the bead, and the next moment a suction opens and hauls in the surrounding origin chi. The halo shatters instantly, the pendant's glow dies, and through the stinging in my mind I run the Tongwan technique with everything I have. A full 15 minutes pass before my faintly trembling body finally settles. I open my eyes and there is joy in them, because it worked. After all that testing, I have finally stacked the functions of 2 semi-spiritual artifacts, and looking at the panel I laugh out loud. My internal strength has climbed by over 700 points, nearly 50% above the 500 the bead produces alone. Add the pills and the technique's own bonus, and my daily internal strength gain now clears 1,000 points. Even if nothing else changes, I can reach Marrow Refining Realm in under 2 months. Not much time has passed since I broke into Bone Forging Realm back in Hyungbun City. A plan that ran over a year has just been compressed into nothing. The martial road is still long, and I have to keep working. I sit cross-legged again and start on the Tranquility Source art, because spiritual power is what the Spirit Refining Realm will run on. And even now, more of it would buy me more time holding the pendant. Once it grows further, I can use the pendant to keep reinforcing my meridians instead of spending everything I own just to pull in origin chi. The next morning, Ji Deokbong delivers the herbs and opens with a sentence that stops me dead, which is that he is taking a concubine. He says it with a smile and adds that after all these years, it is about time he found someone to be with. I ask where he found her. He is over 50, though a martial artist's foundation keeps him looking young, so wanting to settle down now is entirely normal. He says mysteriously that I have met her already. My brow twitches, and looking at how proud he is, a thought crosses my mind and my eyes widen slightly, and I ask, not at all certain, whether it is Baekseom Wei. He laughs triumphantly and asks where my head is. I wipe my forehead. Those two were fire and water days ago, and them suddenly becoming family would be so strange I would have suspected her, or the whole pavilion of running a scheme. So I ask who it actually is. Unji, he says smiling, the one who traveled with us in the Sonon caravan, and asks whether I remember her. I think back and do, faintly, and I did not expect the two of them to have found each other again. He has set out 2 tables at the Wine Immortal restaurant this afternoon, and asks whether I will come and drink with them. I say yes, smiling, because I can see that the Chuihong Pavilion business spooked him, and he simply wants somebody to share a life with. He laughs, and says he will go and find Brother Guak as well. We go to Guak Rimzen's house and knock and find nobody home. Asking around, I learn he has gone into seclusion to consolidate his foundation ahead of the coming True Inheritance legacy. At the Wine Immortal restaurant in Seonan City, in a private room, I meet Nam Unji. She is far more striking than she was with the caravan, where the road had worn her down. Dressed properly, she cannot match Baek Seongwi, and she has a charm that belongs to her. Ji Deokbong does not hold a grand banquet, having few acquaintances in Seonan City. Beyond Sawonhei and a handful of others, there are only some friends he made running his stall, and Nam Unji's family. There are no elaborate rituals either, because he is taking a concubine in order to live a life with somebody, and she feels the same. The banquet runs half an hour before the guests drift away. I take a seat by the window, order a pot of tea, and watch the people passing below. Not cultivating today, I feel a long-lost ease. Alternating tension and rest is the way of the scholar and the warrior, and it seems a man has to rest sometimes. I lift the cup, sip, lean back into the chair, and let my eyes narrow. Listening to the faint notes of a zither, I feel as though I'm floating on cloud, mind and body settling into peace. Inside me, the Tongwan technique actually begins to circulate on its own, not with its usual aggressive surge, but with something calm and unhurried that spreads out through everything around me. Down on the street, Shim Junggyeon spots me dozing in the Wine Immortal restaurant, and a cold light goes through his eyes at once. Seo Wonshun asks what is wrong, seeing him stop. He says gloomily that he told Seo Wonshun days ago about the man he was about to kill, and how the thief escaped, and Seo Wonshun thinks and nods, because that incident left him furious. At the time, Shim Junggyeon says, walking straight into the restaurant, a Wanjin sword sect disciple passed by who could have lent a hand against that thief. Instead, the man completely ignored the request, which is how the scoundrel got away. That Wanjin sword sect disciple is truly too ignorant. Seo Wonshun agrees, and adds that small sects really are no good. Shim Jae-ongyeon stops and turns and asks whether, if he sees that disciple, he should not have a proper talk with him. Of course, Seo Wonshun says firmly, since with the thief escaped, that disciple is at least half to blame. Only half, Shim Jae-ongyeon says. It is entirely that disciple's fault, Seo Wonshun says, revising instantly, because if he had been willing to stay, none of it would have happened. I think so too, says Shim Junggyeon. Then he reaches the second floor, walks up to me and swings a palm at my face without warning. My eyes snap open and I lean back, and his palm sweeps past directly in front of them. His palm force hits the windowsill instead and shatters it, throwing splinters everywhere. The restaurant's manager hurries up at the noise, sees a Seonun sword sect uniform, and retreats immediately. Around Seonun City, the Seonun sword sect is the absolute overlord, and its disciples enjoy every privilege that implies. Anyone else breaking property here would be billed for it. Facing one of theirs, it depends entirely on the man's mood. He withdraws his hand as though nothing happened, looks down at me, and asks whether I still remember him. I take in the clothing on both of them, Sonun sword sect, and I recognize his face from the road days ago. I did not expect the man to still be chewing on it after all this time. Seo Wonshun demands to know whether I heard the question, sizing me up, and curls his lip when he sees a man my age still stuck at bone forging realm. He is bone forging himself, and only in his teens, and by the time he reaches my age he will likely be organ refining realm. However he looks at it, my aptitude is an inferior thing. I stand, frowning, and tell them I am under no obligation to step in when I come across other people fighting. Shim Junggyeon says that I do remember after all. Then he slams a palm onto the table and shouts that he was capturing a man of the Shinyum sect. I saw it, he says, and pretended not to, and turned and left, letting that disciple escape, and he believes I must have some connection to the Shinyum sect to have behaved that way. Senior brother Shim is right, Seo Wonshun shouts, since how else could a man see someone of the Shinyum sect and turn away? The people who had moved off to avoid trouble hear all of it, and understanding spreads, and the talking starts. In Shonen City, the Shinyum sect is an evil sect that everyone is expected to attack, so a Wanjin sword sect disciple seeing them and walking away does look wrong. I did not know that man was a Shinyum sect disciple, I say, shaking my head, and he did not say so at the time. Am I accusing him of framing me? Shim Junggyeon asks softly, ruthlessness sitting openly in his eyes. I have other matters to attend to, I tell them, and turn to leave. They are using their standing to crush me, and I am already holding myself back, and continuing this conversation produces nothing. He asks whether I was given permission to leave, and grabs for my neck. I clench my fist, release it, and flicker aside out of his reach. Seo Wonshun blocks the stairwell and says the matter is not cleared up, and asks what he wants. My eyes fixed on Shim Junggyeon. He laughs and points at me, and announces that he suspects I am a Shinyum sect spy hiding inside the Wanjin sword sect, and orders me to surrender and come with him or not blame him for being impolite. Seo Wonshun shouts at me to surrender. I stop talking. I glance at the window beside me, lean forward, and when he reaches out on instinct to block me, my figure slides past him and I go out through a different window entirely. He shouts at the remnant of the Shinyum sect to die, steps back onto his right foot, vanishes, and comes after me. Seo Wonshun tries to follow and has to stop within moments, watching his senior brother and me disappear out of his sight. Instead of raising his cultivation properly, he says bitterly, some people pour their energy into movement techniques, which he finds foolish. He goes back to the restaurant to wait, since in his view catching me will take a moment, and however decent my movement technique is, the outcome will not change. On the rooftops, my feet touch tile now and then, my whole body gliding forward in leaps like a big bird. The soul-chasing step is pushed to its limit, and I still cannot shake him. I glance back, and the gap between us is slowly closing. I frown at that. My movement technique counts as top tier among the marrow refining realm disciples of the Wanjin sword sect, and stands comparison with some organ refining realm. And a random marrow refining disciple of the Sonon sword sect faintly outruns me. It is mostly the cultivation gap stopping me from expressing the technique fully, and it still says everything about the Sonon sword sect's depth. I have seen what the Shinyam sect can do, and a sect like that only dares to hide, afraid the Sonon sword sect will catch its tail. He shouts that I cannot escape. The distance has come down from 50 or 60 meters to under 20. Rapid flight. Chi moves between my feet in its peculiar way. My body lightens, and I shoot forward several times faster than before. He laughs and asks whether that is my trump card, his own feet swelling slightly as the tiles under him shatter, and he is not shaken loose at all. He stays fixed to my tail. I feel that aura behind me and my expression sets. The movement technique that has always worked is finally not enough today. I want to reach for my bow, and with the movement technique he is showing, arrows would not slow him by a single step. I drop from the eaves to the ground and shoot out through the city gate with him right behind me. The distance keeps closing, and 15 minutes later my speed drops, and he leaps over me and blocks the road and forces me to stop. "Run," he says, looking down at me, the malice no longer hidden. "Why am I not running anymore? There's not that much enmity between us," I say, taking a deep breath. "Whether there is enmity is for him to decide and not for me," he says, laughing, and points a finger at me and mocks that back in the restaurant. If I had let him hit me a few times to vent, this would have been over. And I dared to dodge instead, and then I dared to run, and having done those things I have to pay for them. I stop talking, lift my long sword, and watch him. He asks whether I still want to resist, laughs wildly and says he will let me see how large the gap between us really is. His blade moves and a clap of thunder sounds, and his sword is already in front of me. At the sound, my mind goes blank, and the Tranquility Source art starts circulating on its own and brings me straight back. The Starry Night Sword shield unfolds, sword light forming a shield across my front. I slide back several steps before I stabilize. The sword in my hand shivers, and traces of current run along the blade a moment before dissipating. Startling thunder sword force. I heard endlessly about this technique back in Pyongyang County, and even learned the startle mantra out of it, and I never expected to meet the full version under these conditions. One clap of thunder, chi driving through the long river. What majesty, and what dominance. Without the Tranquility Source art and the Starry Night Sword shield, that single stroke would have killed me. A marrow refining realm disciple of any other sect would have met the same end. "Not bad," he says, his eyes brightening slightly at the shield, and concedes that Wanjin sword sect disciples are not complete trash. Impressive, and only impressive. If I stood at marrow refining realm, there might be a sliver of a chance to escape, and at bone forging realm there is no version of this where I get out of his hands. Thunder cracks again, driving off every evil spirit, and his blade takes on a faint blue glow as his sword style opens and folds me inside it. Great strength. My frame swells slightly as power rises through me, and the Starry Night Sword shield spreads to cover my whole body and blocks every stroke he throws. 10 exchanges in, my body retreats without my choosing it. The thunder's sound I can ignore. The thunder force riding inside the blade is another matter, and my body is finding it harder to absorb. Great strength lets me hold some of it off, and the penetration and the numbness are steadily eating my agility. 10 more exchanges and my muscles will stiffen past using the shield properly, and that ends with his sword taking my head. "The turtle sword is not bad," he says, mocking me, and asks how many more of his strikes it can block. The sword force has already gathered inside me and will detonate naturally in a moment, and whether I live or die after that is entirely his whim. A mere bone-forging realm, and a Wanjin sword sect one at that, daring to put a claw on him. Utterly foolish. 5 exchanges, 6, 7. I feel the stiffness arriving. 2 more and a flaw opens in the shield. A cruel smile is already on his face, and the sword in his hand stays steady, with no impatience and no reckless push. Blinding, deafening. The jade pendant in my robes glows faintly, and just as he starts a stroke, his vision goes pitch black and his ears take in nothing at all, the whole world dropping him at once. His steady sword stroke turns slightly ragged, matching what has happened inside him. Tranquility Source art. The world halts. I see the small opening appear in his stroke. Sword 6. My shoes shatter. Force runs up out of the ground and transfers into my longsword. My skin splits open and shows the blood-red muscle beneath, and blood seeps out of every pore. My sword erupts with blinding light, knocks his stroke aside and drives into his chest. A deep pit blasts into the ground behind him. I withdraw the blade slowly, The dust settles and his eyes and ears are working again, and he stares down at the bowl-sized wound punched through him front to back, with pure disbelief. He is dying, and dying at the hands of a bone-forging realm disciple of the Wanjin sword sect. Laughable and absurd. Moments ago he was about to take me. My throat convulses and I swallow a mouthful of trapped blood. My eyes locked on him. Sword 6 is a desperate life-risking move for what I currently am. If the enemy does not die, I have nothing left to resist with. Using it inside the great strength state has driven my body straight to the edge of collapse. The pendant's faint glow spreads over me and holds my injuries down, keeping them from worsening. With almost no combat strength left, I stay on alert anyway, because no one knows what trump cards an enemy carries. He never expected to be blinded and deafened, which is the only reason the fight turned. Under any normal reading of it, I could neither run nor fight, and I was certain to die, with no stroke of luck available. His mouth trembles and his right hand tries to lift, and his eyes fill with regret and resentment. An inner sect disciple of the Sonon sword sect with a bright future. Dying here. He is not reconciled to it. Then he flips backward onto the ground and stops breathing. Seeing that, I drop where I stand as exhaustion nearly takes me under. This fight was more dangerous than the one against Soksolgiam in the courtyard, because this time nobody came to help, and I could only rely on myself. After gasping a while, I force myself upright, go to his body and start searching it. A moment later, I am smiling, because a Nawan bead is in my hand. He carried the spiritual artifact that is nearly standard issue for the Sonon sword sect. I keep looking. A dozen breaths later, I stand up slowly with a few banknotes and nothing else. No technique manuals, nothing of that kind. And besides the bead he owned, no other spiritual artifacts, which is normal, because spiritual artifacts are precious, and he was ultimately only marrow refining realm. If a marrow refining disciple of the Sonon sword sect carried several of them, the world would be a despairing place. Their sect may be a hegemon, and treasures like that still sit with the minority. Otherwise I would not have killed him so smoothly just now, and might as well have offered my neck. I take a few breaths and first draw a pattern beside the pit. That totem is the mark of the Shineum sect. They often leave it at the scene after they do something, and nobody knows how many incidents actually belong to them, and they never deny any of it anyway. Then I haul his corpse onto my shoulder, because the sword wound on him is far too legible to leave lying there. The evidence has to go, and I have to be nowhere near it. An hour later, I am back at the Wanjin sword sect, covered in blood outside Peng Supo's courtyard, calling out that disciple Jin Bai requests an audience. He is writing in his study, and hearing how weak my voice is, he flickers out to the courtyard and takes in the state of me at a glance, and demands to know what happened. He is beside me instantly, gripping my shoulder, sending internal strength through to check the damage. I ran into a Sonon sword sect disciple. I tell him with a weak laugh, took a beating, and managed to escape. After disposing of the body, I spent the walk working out how to extricate myself. Plenty of people in Sonon City saw me clash with him, and another of their disciples was standing right there. What I had wanted was to avoid the fight entirely, because under that many eyes, fighting and not fighting are both problems. His relentlessness left me no choice, and this is where it ended. I considered telling Peng Supo the truth and settled on the other version, that I was beaten and barely escaped. It is not that I distrust him, it is that my instinct to protect myself runs closer to the bone. And measured purely by our strengths, the likeliest story in the world is that Shim Jungin beat me savagely and I had no power to answer. Escaping at all already flatters my movement technique, since otherwise a beating would not have covered it. A disciple of the Sonon sword sect, he says, furious, his hair stirring. On what grounds did the man hit me? I met him on the road the other day, I say, and lay out the sequence. The more he hears, the darker he gets, because that disciple was pushing things far past any limit. So somebody rushed out and started fighting the man, he asks quietly when I finish. And that is how I finally escaped. Yes, I say, and add that the man's movement technique was extraordinary, and that even with the soul-chasing step I could not shake him. 9 parts truth and 1 part falsehood makes the lie hardest to take apart. He nods and says gravely that I should come with him to report this to the elder on duty. Daring to call me a remnant of the Shineum sect will have endless consequences, if it is not cleared up. He takes me to O Quangjin and recounts everything. O Quangjin says the disciples of the Sonon sword sect are genuinely this overbearing, and calls it outrageous. That lands harder once he sees the state of me, badly beaten, with scorch marks along my arm that are unmistakably startling Thundersword force. Peng Supo says quietly to the elder that he is worried, and that if something has happened to that Sonon sword sect disciple, they will end up framing Jin Bi. That makes sense. O Quangjin says after a moment, and promises to send someone to the Sonon sword sect to lodge a protest, and asks why they must insult Wanjin sword sect disciples like this. Peng Supo sighs slightly, because apparently this is all we can do. Against a power like the Sonon sword sect, our sect protests. I am only injured, after all, with no limbs missing. which barely registers as major, so this beating essentially has to be absorbed, at most, logged as a personal grudge. Inside Seonan City, Seo Wonchun waits bored for his senior brother. An hour passes with no sign, so he orders a table of food and wine. When the second hour passes, he starts to feel that something is wrong. If the man had caught up, the fight would have ended long ago and he would be back, and if he had not caught up, he would have returned even sooner. 2 hours fits nothing. Uneasy, he hurries out of the city, searches nearly an hour, and finally finds a pit. The soil at its edge looks freshly blasted, blood is scattered around it, and there are fragments of a Sonin sword sect uniform on the ground. His face pales. He does not delay and runs for the sect. It does not prove anything happened, and after this long with all these signs, the odds are far too high. Inside the Sonin sword sect, Hong Wanbong's eyes go wide at the news, and the aura of the spirit refining realm fills the room. It is not aimed at Seo Wanchun, and it drains the color out of him anyway. Seo Wanchun recounts the day in detail, not daring to exaggerate anything, reporting everything he saw and heard, afraid of carrying some of the blame himself. He chased a bone-forging realm disciple of the Wanjin sword sect out of the city, Hong Wanbong repeats, and withdraws the aura as the boy stammers. He orders the identity of that disciple checked, and the others sent to look for Shim Jangon. If the man is alive, he wants to see him, and if he is dead, he wants to see the corpse. Seo Wonchun breathes out, bows, and withdraws. 15 minutes later, a dozen figures leap from the Sonan sword sect gate toward the outskirts of Sonan City. The search runs a full day, and afterward they send dozens more outer sect disciples, and in the end, they find no trace of him at all. The man might as well have evaporated. Seo Wonchun reports from below that the Wanjin sword sect disciple is named Jin Bi. Yesterday, he adds, the Wanjin sword sect even sent someone to protest that they were arbitrarily bullying their disciples. Shim Jingyan is missing and that Jin Bi returned safely instead, Hong Wanbong says with a cold laugh, and orders them to tell the Wanjin sword sect to bring me to the Sonin sword sect, because they have questions. So Wonchun bows and withdraws. Somebody murmurs from below that the disappearance surely has nothing to do with that Jin Bi, who is only bone-forging realm after all. And going by the traces outside the city, it is likely the work of Shinyum sect remnants. Hong Wanbong says the disappearance is heavily related to that Jin Bi, and adds that if the man eventually comes back, it is fine. If he does not, he asks, does that Jin Bi imagine he simply gets to go on living? A cold light moves through his eyes. At the Wanjin sword sect, I sit cross-legged on my bed running the Tongwan technique to heal what is broken in me. Whether it is that experience at the restaurant that felt like an epiphany, I cannot say. And in that short window yesterday, the proficiency of the 4th level shot up, and now sits nearly at perfection. Then a dull thud takes my door off its latch, and a group of men pours in, shouting that my secret is out and telling me to come out. I open my eyes and look at them, and the leader's clothing marks them as the sect's enforcement hall. Trespassing in a disciple's residence violates sect rules. I say standing, my brow tightening. My first thought was that the Sonin sword sect's countermeasure had arrived, and I did not expect the first men through the door to be ours. Oh, Quang Jin said yesterday he would seek justice for me, and today they are here to arrest me. Zhou Hanzheng sneers that I am connected to the disappearance of a Sonin sword sect disciple, and orders me to come with them. The enforcement hall has never cared about that rule, because they are the ones who enforce the rules, and every time anything happens, they come through doors. A Sonin sword sect disciple went missing, I say looking at him, and our sect's enforcement hall is making the arrest. Are they the enforcement hall of the Sonin sword sect? He reacts as though his tail has been stepped on and flies into a rage, blurring across the room and reaching for my throat. A mere bone-forging realm disciple being this bold, and he wants to teach me on the spot which things are not said aloud. Then Guak Rimson is in the doorway, and seeing the strike, he shouts and swings his sword at Zhu Hanzheng's back. Others shout for him to stop, and that striking an enforcement hall disciple is a greater crime, and none of them are fast enough to prevent it. Zhou Hanzheng feels it coming, frowns, and flickers aside. He plants himself in the corner of the room and demands to know whether Guak Rimson understands what he is doing, and whether obstructing enforcement hall business means he wants to take a trip there himself. Guak Rimson demands to know what they are doing arresting Jin Bi without cause, standing in front of me and putting me behind him. Fresh out of seclusion, he heard about my situation from Peng Supo and came running, and walked into this. I look at him and something moves in me. In this sect, the two people I met are the best thing that has happened to me. A Seonan sword sect disciple has disappeared, and I am a major suspect, Zhu Hanzheng says, and I must be escorted there to clear it up, and if there is no problem I will naturally be able to return. Feeling how thick Guak Rimson's aura is, he has little confidence about taking him by force. He also knows Guak Rimson is preparing to contest the true inheritance legacy, and that success would transform his standing entirely. What does a missing Sonon Sword Sect disciple have to do with us? Guak Rimsan shouts. And does Elder O know about this? This is an order from Elder Zhang, Ju Han Zheng says heavily, and warns him not to make a mistake. Guak Rimsan's brow tightens, because Zhang Banwan is an elder of the Wanjin Sword Sect, notorious for favoring the Sonin Sword Sect, and sometimes more diligent about their orders than about our own affairs. If the order is his, none of this is surprising. Guak Rimsan shouts that junior brother Jin is the victim, and was beaten by the Sonin Sword Sect, and that now they want him delivered to them, and he asks whether they want him dead. If there are questions, he says, they can be asked clearly inside our own sect, because he absolutely will not let me go there. If I do go, I likely do not come back, and even lucky I come back crippled. Johan Jun barks that Guak Rimsan does not have the final say in this, and warns him one last time to move aside. The other enforcement hall disciples draw their long swords and level them at Guak Rimsan, waiting on a word to swarm him. Obstructing the enforcement hall permits being cut down by a flurry of swords, under the sect's own rules. This matter is not decided, says a voice drifting in, and it is impossible to send him to the Sonon Sword Sect. Peng Supo is outside. Ju Hanzheng's eyes narrow, and after a moment he sheathes his sword. He can be firm against Guak Rimsan, and against Peng Supo he has no confidence whatsoever. The man stood in the spirit-refining realm years ago, and even fallen he is nothing an ordinary organ-refining martial artist can measure himself against. He suspects the whole enforcement hall rushing at once would not last a handful of strikes. Then go to the enforcement hall first, Ju Hanzheng says, taking a step back, and insists that I must enter its prison today. Peng Supo tells Guak Rimsan to go and find Elder O, and says he will accompany me. Guak Rimsan nods and runs for the mountain. The group makes its way to the enforcement hall slowly, mainly because Peng Supo walks deliberately slowly, and Zhou Hanzheng does not dare lose his temper, and simply endures it. By the time we arrive, the doors are shut tight, and there is fierce arguing behind them. Guak Rimsan arrives at his side and whispers that Elder O is already inside. Peng Supo nods, which is exactly why he walked that slowly. He can suppress Ju Hanzheng, and he certainly cannot suppress Zhong Banwan. Before his cultivation fell, it would have been easy, and now facing that head-on is impossible. Guak Rimsan tells me nothing will happen, and that Elder O will not let me go over there. I nod and look at the hall. Inside, O Quangjin is demanding to know whether Zhang Banwan feels any shame at all, considering binding one of his own disciples to curry favor with the Sonon Sword Sect. When Guak Rimsan came running with the news, O Quangjin was furious. Our own disciple was bullied by the Sonon Sword Sect, and we cannot even seek justice, which is one thing, because the gap in strength is real. Now instead of seeking justice, we are to detain the disciple and hand him over for interrogation. He wants to know whether any justice is left and whether this is not going too far. That Jin B is a suspect to begin with, Zhang Banwan says, unhurried. And the Sonin Sword Sect is not calling him the killer and only wants to understand the situation, and asks what is wrong with that. If one of our disciples went missing, and it involved them, he says, he would also ask their disciples to come and explain. Oh, Quangjin asks whether the Sonon Sword Sect is really going to ask a few questions, and whether Zhong Banwan genuinely does not know what kind of character Hong Wanbong is. If I enter that sect, the best case is crippled, and the worst is dead. His eyes drive at the man as he says he will absolutely not allow it. Our sect may be weak and must still have a spine, or how can anyone expect the disciples to hold together? It is not that exaggerated, Zhong Banwan says, waving it off. With so many eyes watching, they will not go too far. And as long as there is no problem with me, my life is not in danger. Oh, Guangjin says angrily that the boy is not one of theirs, so they do not care. What kind of talk is that? Zhang Banwan says, the smile leaving his face, and claims he simply does not want the sect in conflict with the Sonin Sword Sect over letting one disciple go and answer a few questions. This matter ends here, O Quangjin says, taking a deep breath, and states flatly that the disappearance has nothing to do with me, that I was severely beaten by them, and that sending me there is absolutely impossible. I am the elder of the enforcement hall, Zhang Banwan says heavily, and if a disciple appears who endangers the safety of the Wanjin Sword Sect, they must be dealt with, and that authority was granted to him by the sect. Take it to the sect leader, and Jin B still does not go, O Quangjin says, and offers to be taken to the Sonon Sword Sect himself, because he would like to see exactly how they intend to interrogate one of ours. He leaves that behind him and shatters the enforcement hall door with a palm. Seeing us, he waves and tells us to follow him, and says there is no need to stay here. Elder O, Ju Hanzheng starts, hurrying to block us under Zhang Banwan's stare, and one look at the man's face takes the rest of the sentence out of him. O Quangjin is visibly detonating, and stopping him now risks ending up like the door. We follow him to a large hall. His anger has drained and his expression has gone somewhat hollow. I step forward and bow and thank the elder for resolving it. This matter is not over, he says quietly. He knows Hong Wonbong's character, and the man will keep pressing until I am handed over. That is what dealing with a hegemon looks like, and there are no better answers, because we are simply weaker, and being weak in this world means being bullied. Sometimes one man says a single word and a crowd rushes to act on it. Does the Sonon Sword sect genuinely believe a bone-forging realm boy could kill one of their marrow-refining realm disciples? Peng Supo asks, frowning. Of course not. Oh Quanjin says, and adds that Hong Wonbong is the type to vent on whoever is nearest, according to his mood. His expression sours every time the name comes up. Then what do we do? Guak Rimson worries, and asks whether the sect will really hand my junior brother over. I will not allow it, Oh Quangjin says heavily, and swears that in the end, even if he has to take this to the sect leader or the Grand Elder, he will make it clear. I cup my hands and thank him. Elder O, Guak Rimson says, racking his memory, and landing on my other identity. My junior brother is an 8th grade alchemist of the Alchemist Alliance, and asks whether that is worth anything here. Oh, Quangjin looks at me with some surprise and asks whether I really am one of their alchemists. The Alchemist Alliance would certainly not clash head-on with the Sonon Sword sect, and the Alliance's current head is Wai Hyung-san, the peak master of the Sonon Sword sect's own alchemy peak. From what Oh Quangjin knows though, that peak master and Hong Wonbong do not get along. Put enough people anywhere and there are groups and factions and then conflicts, exactly as with Oh Quangjin and Zhang Banwan. The Sonon Sword sect is no different, so the question becomes whether my alchemist identity can be used to ask the Alliance for help. At the Alchemist Alliance in Seonin City, a deacon steps forward respectfully and tells Wai Hyung-sun that an 8th grade alchemist is seeking the Alliance's help. Somebody is bullying our alchemists, Wai Hyung-sun says, surprised, because since he took charge, such things have been rare and rarer still reported to him directly. Yes, the deacon says, and after checking his face, he reports the rest. This alchemist says Hong Wonbong of the Sonon Sword sect is framing him for killing one of their disciples, and now intends to drag him there. The deacon did not want to bring this up at all, and it involves the Sonon Sword sect, the Wanjin Sword sect, and one of the Alliance's own alchemists, so failing to report it clearly and having it go wrong would leave him carrying more. Wai Hingzhen frowns, and the frown deepens at the name Hong Wonbong. He asks whether the specifics have been investigated. They have, the deacon says, and lays out the situation as he understands it. The matter is simple and clear, and the number of powers touching it is what makes it complicated. Wai Hyung-zan snorts and says Hong Wonbong believes a marrow-refining realm disciple of the Sonon Sword sect was killed by a bone-forging realm disciple of the Wanjin Sword sect. The bone-forging one, he adds, walked away entirely fine. He sounds thoroughly displeased. Is that the message the Sonon Sword sect wants broadcast about itself? It is rumored the Shinyom sect's emblem was found at the scene, the deacon murmurs. Troubling a bone-forging realm alchemist, Wai Hyang-san says, and observes that Shim Jungyeon is truly worthy of being Hong Wonbong's disciple, since the two are identical. A hegemonic power ought to suppress every direction with grandeur, and bullying people is fine, and bullying someone until the bully himself goes missing is losing face to the absolute extreme. He orders a message passed, telling the sect not to trouble this alchemist, and that if they have the ability they should find the real murderer. The deacon nods and bows and withdraws. Wai Hyun-zan looks at the book in his hand, finds it less and less interesting, slams the table, and stays dissatisfied. At the Wanjin Sword sect, I am in a guest room in Peng Supo's courtyard. He is worried the enforcement hall will come again and act first and report later, so he simply keeps me here. The Tongwan technique circulates through me, repairing what is damaged. Then the internal strength that has been moving slowly shudders, and starts traveling my meridians at a peculiar vibrating frequency, and the injuries in me begin improving fast, the repair speed climbing sharply. I do not stop it, and only stop after a full hour. Opening my eyes to the warmth in my body, I look surprised, and checking the panel it lands. The 4th level of the Tongwan technique has reached perfection. This 4th level has genuinely transformed something, I say to myself, because my body seems slightly changed. It is hard to name what kind of change it is. I simply feel lighter, as though a little weight has come off me. I keep reading the panel, and beyond the perfection there seems to be nothing else. Then my eyes widen slightly at my realm. Bone forging, 47,310 out of 99,336. Breaking into marrow refining realm originally required 100,000 experience. The 100,000 has shrunk by a few hundred. So this is what the 4th level of the Tongwan technique gives toward a breakthrough. I am surprised and delighted, because it genuinely lowered the difficulty, and following this trend every circulation should lower the ceiling again. On top of that, I can take pills and absorb origin chi daily, and the two together collapse the time a breakthrough needs. And this is only the 4th level. The 5th will surely do the same for the marrow refining realm that follows. My fists clench at that. Low cultivation is genuinely unbearable.